Chapter 6:12. In hand, the two street lamps on either side of the stone bridge silently illuminated the street, but they were unable to disperse the darkness beneath. Only the crimson moonlight from high above could barely illuminate the brown soil. Hidden under the bridge, Fate Counselor Ricardo remained silent for quite a while, making Klein suspect whether he had already passed away due to his heavy injuries. He guessed that a large reason as to why the luck augmentation had failed was because of this. Just as Klein was about to ask a probing question to determine the situation, Ricardo coughed and said in a deep, hoarse voice, "You live up to the reputation of being a powerful adventurer capable of temporarily sealing the die. What happened has exceeded my expectations. Ahem. I'm very curious as to why my luck augmentation on you had failed. I'm very regretful that I can't come out and meet you in person. Otherwise, I should be able to see what beyonders from other pathways will find difficult to see, even if they possess relatively powerful spirit visions. This is the uniqueness that the fate pathway holds. So the problem lies with me? That's not the point. The point is that you need to reimburse me £700. No, £730. Klein cursed as he couldn't help but recall the orphan, Adamasol, who had the nickname of Monster in Tingen City. The young man who was equal to half a sequence 9 had cried out after seeing Klein before falling to the ground. His eyes bled, and the fear he exhibited was as if he had seen a devil. This is because of the uniqueness of the Wheel of Fortune's path of the divine. So he saw something wrong with me. He saw something related to the gray fog? Unfortunately, this fate counselor is quite heavily injured and has a domain of bad luck around him. There's no way for him to help inspect me. I should ask Snake of Fate will accept in when I'm back. Perhaps he might know something. However, this pathway does have the bearing of a charlatan. He might not directly answer me, and has a high chance of answering in vague terms. Klein maintained his expressionless attitude and said, "Then, what do you plan on doing?" Ricardo sighed and said, "Get Darkwill here. I'll augment him with good luck, and get him to win the money at the casinos on your behalf." Using the name of the counselor Ricardo gave, Klein quickly found the chubby apothecary Darkwill. Then, while carrying the suitcase and cane, Klein watched as he kept winning money at the major casinos. By midnight, he had already won £750. After receiving the remaining £730, Klein realized a problem. The reason for the luck augmentation's failure was because of him. Why is that so? Klein held close his bulging wallet and frowned as he thought silently to himself. He quickly thought of the thin, invisible grayish-white fog around him and realized the reason. After advancing to Faceless, the gray fog has integrated with reality to a certain extent. Not only can it help me screen off ravings that aren't too powerful, but it can also destroy any influence that changes my fate to a certain extent. Therefore, this counselor's luck augmentation was ineffective? According to this logic, bad luck to a certain extent shouldn't affect me either. What the heck? It doesn't make me become some unlucky fool, but it also destroys my chance of being a lucky man or winner. Klein secretly shook his head and followed Darkwill and the owl back to the stone bridge. He informed Ricardo of how to summon his messenger and to immediately send him news once he obtained any information on a mystical item with powerful offensive traits. After doing all of this, Klein found an inn at the Orvie Island's port city and got a simple room for himself. Backlund. In the morning, Emlyn White walked under his favorite gloomy skies, moving through the thick fog that couldn't be compared to those in November or December, as he once again arrived outside Northborough's 7 Pinster Street. After pulling the doorbell, he straightened his back as he lifted his chin and waited patiently. When Leonard opened the door, he looked at the handsome but detestable face before making way and allowing the visitor to enter. He was still dressed in his home wear, comprising of a white shirt and black trousers. However, he had an additional dark-colored vest draped over him. "Have you considered the matter?" Leonard asked with a smile. "No problem." Since it wasn't his money, Emlyn had no intention to haggle. He even believed that with the attitude displayed by Leonard, there was a high chance of having the price raised if he tried. Leonard gently nodded and smiled. "Very rich. I can tell that you're trying to lead me to say more." Emlyn silently scoffed and replied, That's not something you need to concern yourself with. With that said, he raised the suitcase in his hand and opened it, revealing 7,000 pounds in cash. Leonard took out each stack of cash and thoroughly checked it carefully. Then, he pulled off the red glove he wore on his left hand and handed it to Emlyn. This is the mystical item you require. It can change colors to disguise itself. It's called tinder. It can raise the wearer's charm, making his words be equipped with great persuasiveness. It can steal the beyonder power of a target within 50 meters. The more you understand the target, the easier it is to steal the power you wish to steal. The less you know, the more random it becomes, and it relies on luck. When the target is at sequence 6, there is a chance of failure. The higher the sequence, the higher the chance of failure. After the theft succeeds, the target will lose that beyonder power, and it will take at least 12 hours to recover. The owner of Tinder will be able to use it adeptly for 10 minutes. And the reason why it's expensive is because it has very few negative side effects. Emlyn, who silently took in the introduction, had his interest piqued by a mystical item like Tinder. He asked, "What are its negative side effects?" Leonard combed his hair and smiled. First, when wearing it, there is a small probability of losing something on you. Second, when using it, a particular beyonder power belonging to you will be lost for at least 12 hours. But during this period, it will be the only beyonder power lost. In other words, even if it's used repeatedly, there will only be one power lost the entire time. Compared to the many sealed artifacts I know of, its negative side effects are indeed trivial. Emlyn cleared his throat as he nodded. He received Tinder and checked it carefully before taking out the stacks of cash from the suitcase and placing them on the coffee table. Following that, he placed the glove into the suitcase and didn't take it with him directly. With the suitcase, Emlyn returned to the Harvest Church just like he did before. Once he entered the priest's break room, he set up a sacrifice ritual. The illusory and mysterious door opened as the red glove tore through the dark and deep void, as it was sent directly above the gray fog. At the moment the gray fog made contact with the glove, a tiny, distorted, terrifying face suddenly appeared. It kept evaporating as it struggled to sustain itself. Upon seeing this scene, Klein wasn't surprised. After all, the grandpa residing in Leonard's body was an angel of the Marauder pathway. If Amon could do it, it was quite certain that he was capable of doing the same. For this, he had made sufficient preparations. He believed that even if the grandpa had really reached Amon's level, he was able to wipe out the corresponding aura without making him sense the existence of the gray fog, making him take action on Emlyn. Picking up the sea god scepter, which had long been placed in front of him, Klein made the blue gems light up at the same time from a commanding position. Suddenly, silver light bloomed above the gray fog as the lightning carried portions of the gray fog's powers like a storm, zapping the tiny illusory face. The face dissipated completely before it could even cry out, leaving behind a dead translucent worm with 12 transparent rings. Worm of time, but it seems weaker than Amon. Klein muttered as he beckoned with his hand for the red glove and familiar worm to fly to him. After some serious scrutiny, he confirmed that the worm was basically identical to the one Amon's avatar had left behind. My dear poet's grandpa is of the same sequence as Amon? Sequence 1? No, not necessarily. Perhaps this is a unique trait of one of the earlier sequences. If it's really a sequence 1, the notion that Amon is the son of the creator and a king of angels makes it possible that he has fused with the uniqueness or has another sequence 1 characteristic. Klein made a guess, but he was unable to verify it. As for what the dead worm of time could be used for, or when its spirituality would completely dissipate, he could only throw it into the junk pile, due to his lack of the corresponding knowledge. 7 Pinsta Street, Backlund. Leonard Mitchell sat on the sofa with his eyes tightly closed. His legs were propped up on the coffee table, as though he was using a short nap to make up for an entire night of being awake. After an unknown period of time, he suddenly opened his eyes and said with a suppressed voice, "What happened? Have you determined the true buyer of Tinder?" An elderly voice rang out in his mind. "The aura I left behind has been eliminated, completely eliminated." "Did you discover anything?" Leonard retracted his feet as he asked in a deep voice. The ancient voice sighed. Nothing. Everything was over before I could react. If I were in my best state, I might have been able to grasp the relevant clues. Unfortunately, I've remained in a weak state for years. Leonard remained silent for more than 10 seconds before he shook his head. Then we'll temporarily treat it as if this never happened. Above the gray fog, Klein listened to Emlin's report and took note of the information regarding the mystical item. He fiddled with the glove named Tinder as he examined it. Heh, this way, I'll have a glove for my right hand, he chuckled as he muttered to himself. After serious consideration, Klein abandoned the thought of immediately extracting the mental corruption of the true creator from the all-black eye. This was to ensure his success, hoping to leave the chance to the moment when he was concocting the Nimblewright Master Potion. According to the records of the City of Silver, even without the gray fog screening, there were no problems with such a procedure. Furthermore, with the gray fog, there wouldn't be any additional accidents, even if it were the mental corruption left behind by the true creator. I can also use Tinder normally. Yes, when I need to use it, I have to put my cash, pocket watch, and other mystical items above the gray fog. I mustn't let any item become lost. In fact, even if I don't do so, the problem isn't too great. I'm a seer. Do I need to be afraid of not being able to find things I dropped? Heh. In a normal battle, I'll have creeping hunger on my left hand and Tinder on my right. Just the thought of it sounds formidable. Klein reined in his thoughts and discovered that everything related to the Sequence 5 Nimblewright Master Potion was ready, apart from the 2 commonly seen supplementary ingredients. He nodded indiscernibly and muttered silently to himself. I just need to wait for the faceless potion to be completely digested. Then, I'll board the ship of Admiral of Stars, or the Hanged Man, and head east of the Sonia Sea to find mermaids. Chapter 613. Leonard's Investigation. Lone Kingdom, Eastchester County, Stone City. Having left the manor, Audrey moved into a villa. After she finished engaging in social gatherings with the local nobles, she sent her servant to the Varvat Bank to withdraw a sum of cash. She didn't need to worry about this any further. She could easily pay off the £2,000 she owed Mr. Fool's Blessed, and she could also pay the £1,800 she owed Mr. World for the psychiatrist's characteristic. 15 minutes later, Audrey opened the room to her bedroom and glanced at her personal maidservant, Annie, who was monitoring the servants while they did their work. She looked down at the golden retriever, who was sitting by the side of the wall, and smiled. With a smile, she suppressed her voice and asked with shining eyes, Susie, you'll receive a gift in a while. Are you looking forward to it? If it were in the past, Audrey would have definitely said, Susie, your present is here, making the golden retriever realize that she could find the actual item in the room as well. Otherwise, it was very easy for Susie, who had been studying the basics of mysticism, to guess that Audrey had used ritualistic magic. With this new sentence structure, the situation could have Audrey receive a mysterious letter or news in her bedroom to confirm that the gift was about to be delivered. There would be too many possibilities as a result of this. Susie could read the joy and sincere attitude deep inside Audrey's heart as she subconsciously opened her mouth, hoping to stir the air to produce a voice. She had wanted to inquire about the gift, but she sharply sensed that Audrey's personal maid, Annie, was approaching. The alert Susie abandoned her original thoughts. She returned to the state of being an ordinary dog as she slowly wagged her tail to express her joy and anticipation. After making an excuse to head out, Audrey entered a chemistry laboratory that she had specially marked out for herself. She placed the psychiatrist's characteristic and supplementary ingredients on the table. Susie, do you still remember the potion concocting process? She cleared her throat and straightened her back as she excitedly played the role of a teacher. Woof, I remember. Susie already knew what her present was. In her joy, she barked. Audrey added, try to concoct it by yourself. Susie looked down at her paws and suddenly fell silent. Audrey was taken aback before a brief silence ensued. A few seconds later, before the golden retriever could speak, Audrey covered her mouth without any atypical response and giggled. All right, Susie, there's no need to say a word. I know what you wish to say. You wish to express the fact that you're only a dog and am unable to concoct the potion, right? How embarrassing. At the same time, Audrey, who wore a charming and graceful external bearing, face-bombed herself inwardly. Woof. Susie nodded forcefully. Audrey took the opportunity and turned around. Soon she finished concocting the psychiatrist's potion. She had previously asked Susie and learned that she had already finished digesting the potion on Wednesday. That's less than 2 months. Yes, a large reason has to do with how Susie isn't being noticed. She can run about anywhere in the manor or villa and eavesdrop, allowing her to read the true thoughts of the maidservants. That's good as well. She will always share the tidbits with me. If not for her, I wouldn't have known of the dark sides of many people who appear normal and kind usually. Audrey poured the potion into a bowl and placed it on the floor. She watched as Susie went over and began licking the potion, as she couldn't curb the anticipation in her heart. Susie might be influenced by the potion and become unstable. But it's all right. Psychiatrist Miss Audrey is already prepared to use placate at any moment. Yes, I prefer the name psychoanalysis. That sounds more professional. Audrey stared at Susie with her beautiful emerald-like eyes with great seriousness and discovered that Susie's pupils were gradually fading and turning vertical. Dark gold scales seemed to grow beneath her thick fur, and the spirituality that belonged to Susie kept radiating outwards, as though it was interweaving with the entire villa's space. After calming her somewhat nervous emotions, Audrey scrutinized Susie's state. As long as something abnormal happened to Susie, she would immediately use the beyond her power, psychoanalysis. Suddenly, Susie's voice sounded out in her ears. Audrey, I'm done. Audrey was temporarily at a loss on what to say. In her dream, Daisy returned to East Borough and to the old apartment she had lived in for years. She pushed open the door and saw her mother, Liz, and her sister Freja doing the laundry diligently. Daisy instantly became delighted and was just about to join them. She was in charge of ironing the laundry. At this moment, she heard knocking at the door. She turned her head and realized that the visitor was a young man in a black and white checkered police uniform. The officer had black hair and green eyes, with a somewhat blurry face. He held a notebook and fountain pen as he asked, "In the Capum case, apart from what you mentioned, is there anything else you didn't mention to us?" "It's all nothing important," Daisy answered in a rather groggy manner. The handsome officer looked down at his notebook and said, "It's fine. I'm willing to listen." Daisy looked back at the clothes which were hung up, feeling as though she had forgotten some instructions. She honestly described all sorts of trivialities. In the end, she said, "After I was abducted, my mother and sister had hired a private detective to search for me. His name is Mr. Sherlock Moriarty. He's a good man. Although he didn't find me directly, he later contacted a reporter to help me get compensated with the foundation money." The black-haired and green-eyed officer looked up again and glanced at Daisy before revealing a warm smile. "Very good. Your answer is very satisfactory. Do you still remember the private detective's appearance?" Daisy nodded. Without any alarm, she saw Mr. Sherlock Moriarty standing beside her. The detective had grown a thick beard and wore gold-rimmed glasses. It was almost identical to the one in her memories. After the black-haired, green-eyed officer sized up the image a few times, he seemed to vanish at some point in time without Daisy realizing it. For some reason, her mother and sister had also vanished. She ran through East Borough in search of the familiar figures, but she ultimately woke up from her depression and sorrow. When she saw the dark ceiling of her school dormitory, she lay there in a daze for seconds. Daisy didn't make a sound as she turned her body and buried half her face into the pillow. By the corners of the pillow, a wet stain gradually spread out. The person who had entered Daisy's dream was none other than Leonard Mitchell. Although his investigation of the commonalities of the two cases was to give him time to deal with matters of his own, he didn't forget to act in a perfunctory manner. In the end, he really discovered a problem. In the cases of Lenevis and Capum, a private detective named Sherlock Moriarty was involved, including his friend, reporter Mike Joseph. Although they had only appeared on the outskirts of this matter, it's also a direction for the investigation. That Sherlock Moriarty looks somewhat familiar. Which fugitive is he? Leonard recalled what he had seen in the dream, as he wore his red glove, and entered the basement of St. Samuel Cathedral. Just as he greeted the team captain Soist, he saw a partner approach and hand him 2 thin sheets of paper. The information regarding the red-eyed man from the Harvest Church is all here. Thank you. Do you want to have lunch together? Leonard asked with a smile. The Nighthawk shrugged and said, No, as long as you stop making me have nightmares. Deal. Leonard smiled as he received the dossier. He stood there without being in a hurry to sit down as he casually browsed through it. Emlyn White, a vampire, currently under the jurisdiction of the Church of Earth Mother. He once vanished for a period of time. His parents had hired private detectives to find him. Thanks to a particular Mr. Stewart, this matter was ultimately resolved by the famous detective, Sherlock Moriarty. Leonard's smile gradually froze as his expression turned serious. Sherlock Moriarty. He repeated this name in his mind. Klein wasn't in a rush to find an opportunity to engage in true acting. He toured Orvie Island's port city with the mindset of a tourist, finding a brief and rare moment of relaxation in his tense life. This city had mostly immigrants from Lone. The cuisine wasn't much different from the east coast of the kingdom, with the only difference being that there were rare fruits and all sorts of seafood here. It was also quite a unique trait of the city. This place was rich in natural resources and was located in a key location on the safe sea routes. The standard of living was pretty good. Even the farmers in the suburbs could save up some money through their fruit gardens. This didn't mean that Orvie didn't have poor people or the lower class. This class was mainly made up of people who were former slaves. Lone's parliament had long abolished slavery. After chewing a juicy and sweet fruit, Klein watched the sky turn dark. He took a turn at the corner of the street and entered a bar named Sweet Lemon. It was a famous gathering place for adventurers in Orvie. Klein planned on buying the 2 remaining supplementary ingredients of a Nimblewright master, the relatively common Drago tree bark and Sonia Golden spring water. At this moment, the bar was rather lively. There were many people holding up cups around the boxing ring as they cheered loudly. There were people who looked like adventurers at the surrounding tables. They were discussing all kinds of rumors in hushed tones. Just as Klein was squeezing towards the bar counter, he suddenly heard his name. I'm Gehrman Sparrow. You should know who I am. I received a treasure map and need to hire some helpers. It's not because I'm afraid, but it's because I can't carry that much treasure alone. A green-eyed man in his 30s held half a glass of liquor and spoke to 2 men and 2 women in the corner. It was a mystery if they were merchants or adventurers. You are also named Gehrman Sparrow? Treasure map, why does it sound like a scam? My killing of Wormtongue has already reached this place from Byam? Yes, it was likely communicated via a telegram or visitors. Therefore, many people know of my name and deeds, but do not know what I look like. Cheats are using this opportunity to pass themselves off as me to cheat others. Klein moved over as he came to a realization. The green-eyed man drank a mouthful of liquor and slammed the glass onto the table. I don't mind whether you refuse or agree, but I hate it when people make me wait. Do you wish to be like Wormtongue? The young man opposite him said, slightly intimidated. I know you're a powerful adventurer. So? The green-eyed man cut off the man's words. At that moment, he felt his collar tighten as he was lifted up by someone and thrown out the door. Klein didn't provide an explanation, as he directly threw the man out of the door with a stoic expression. Then, he drew his revolver and aimed it at the spot where the man had fallen to the ground. He pulled the trigger without any hesitation. Bang! Just as the green-eyed man fell to the ground, he saw a spark light up at the ground near his crotch. He was so frightened that he swallowed back his cursing and scrambled away. Without any explanation, his weak performance proved that he wasn't Gehrman Sparrow. Klein ignored the victim who stood there in a daze. He politely blew at the mouth of his revolver before stuffing it back into his underarm holster. Following that, he walked slowly to the bar counter in the resulting silent atmosphere. Chapter 614. Adventurer Association. Klein sat in front of the bar counter and slammed his fist onto the counter. 1 glass of Southville beer. Behind him, a few bouncers hesitated about whether to come over to give him a warning or pretend that no one had fired a shot. The bartender signaled to the bouncers with his eyes as he picked up a glass and chuckled. "Why don't you try a cup of sweet lemon? Our boss once went to Trier to learn cocktail mixing. He has mastered many of the cocktail recipes left behind by Emperor Roselle, and he has created the most popular sweet lemon in Orvie on his own." Klein wasn't moved as he calmly replied, "I only drink beer." "All right." The bartender wasn't in a rush to get the bottle of Southville beer as he said with a smile, "Sir, are you an adventurer?" Klein nodded without saying an answer. The bartender didn't hesitate as he said with a smile, "Perhaps you should meet our boss. He's very friendly to new adventurers and is willing to treat them to drinks. Besides, there will be some aid offered to you." Klein, who had come with the intention of purchasing the supplementary ingredients of a Nimblewright master, didn't reject the offer. He took out a brass penny and flicked it before catching it firmly. He placed the penny on the bar counter as a tip to thank the bartender for the information, before slowly standing up and walking to the second floor under the lead of a bouncer, where he entered a room at the other end of the corridor. The room was covered with thick brownish-yellow soft carpet. There was a faint smell of high-quality coal burning, mixed with the aroma of a cigar. A middle-aged man with his blonde hair combed neatly backwards was leaning on a reclining chair, sucking at his cigar as he read the papers. Surrounding him were 6 bodyguards. Although Klein wasn't a beyonder of the spectator domain, and he was unable to determine any unique traits or the strength of these bodyguards, nor was he from the mystery prior or monster pathway, he could see certain secrets. He could notice things others wouldn't be able to discover. But his spiritual intuition made him believe that these bodyguards were definitely beyonders. Beyonders who could threaten him to a certain extent. The middle-aged man put down the newspaper and pulled at the collars of his black shirt before slowly standing up. He extended his right hand and said, "Welcome to Orvie, my adventurer friend." His blue eyes had a smile to them as he looked rather sincere. Klein extended his right palm and smacked palms with him without a word. He was waiting for the man to speak. The middle-aged man pointed to a sofa opposite the reclining chair and chuckled. "I'm the boss here, built Brando. I was once an adventurer with quite considerable strength. I've lived to this day and have earned quite a bit." He's very confident with his strength, thus daring to directly say it. Klein didn't stand on ceremony as he sat down. He leaned his body slightly forward as he expressionlessly waited for Bilt to begin talking. Seeing no response from the adventurer, Bilt sat down again and sucked at his cigar before leisurely saying, "To be honest, there's a motive behind me meeting with every new adventurer." He pointed to the sea map on the desk in the table. He said with a magnetic tone, "East from the Rorstad archipelago is where the sea gets progressively messier. The strength of the military and church begin to dwindle, to the point of them only being able to protect their own harbors. The sea around here is a pirate playground, extremely disadvantageous to us adventurers. Therefore, I wish to organize everyone to form a loosely connected alliance, so that we can band together when faced with danger. This alliance doesn't have any strong binding terms. You can choose to turn a blind eye when other adventurers encounter danger, and no one will punish you. However, if you were to encounter a similar situation, don't hope for help to be provided. In addition, I can promise one point. Adventurers of the Alliance will be able to get the prices of the lowest nature when purchasing items from me. When selling their spoils, they will at least get market price." After finishing the description, Bilt smiled at the new adventurer. He chuckled and asked, "What do you think of it? Are you interested in joining this loose alliance? Don't worry, you won't need to make any additional payment. Our purpose is only to render assistance when faced with pirates." Klein nodded. "It sounds pretty good." "Haha, I think so too. I once thought of naming this association the Adventuring Brotherhood, but I felt that brotherhood is overly constrained, so I changed it to Adventurer Association," Bilt said in a self-deprecating manner. Having said that, he lowered his hand with the cigar and smacked his lips. He shook his head and smiled. "Sorry, I forgot to ask your name." Klein maintained his posture and replied in a deep voice, "Gehrman Sparrow." "Gehrman Sparrow." Bilt's eyelids jumped as his smile instantly stiffened. The guards around him clearly tensed up, as though they were facing a formidable enemy. Bilt rapidly composed himself and didn't verify whether he was the real Gehrman Sparrow or a cheat who was only passing off as Gehrman Sparrow. He chuckled and said, "Is there anything you wish to buy? I have quite a lot of good stuff over here." "Sonia's golden spring water," Klein said with a calm expression while inwardly feeling cautious. He didn't mention the Drago tree bark, since there was a high chance of buying the ingredient at herb stores. Bilt Brando heaved a sigh of relief and smiled. "Easy. 30 pounds for 100 milliliters. Trust me. Even if you head to Sonia Island, it will only be a few pounds cheaper than this price." Those barbarians from Fasak have sealed off the fountain source, so it's difficult for others to get any of it. Deal. Klein had a rough idea of the price of the golden spring water, and he knew that 30 pounds for 100 milliliters was indeed rather cheap. After completing the deal, Bilt was just about to speak after some deliberation, when he suddenly heard knocking. After receiving his permission, a bouncer entered and leaned over, whispering into his ear. Bilt's expression instantly sank as his entire person appeared abnormally cold. He suffused an indescribable killing intent. Indeed, he has quite impressive strength. If he wasn't a famous adventurer in the past, he was a famous pirate. He should be a mid-sequence beyonder. Klein looked at him as he calmly made an assessment. Bilt turned his head and said to Klein with some difficulty, "Mr. Sparrow, I have matters to tend to. We can have drinks together if the opportunity arises." "Okay." Klein slowly got up, without any intention of involving himself in Bilt's matters. Of course, this didn't mean that he wasn't curious, but curiosity was never something that could change the way he did things. After leaving Sweet Lemon, Klein successfully returned to his inn. City of Silver. Daytime, which was marked by frequent lightning. After Derek Berg finished practicing all the different Beyonder powers of Solar High Priest, he followed the edge of the training field and headed for the Twin Towers. After numerous tarot gatherings, he gradually gained an understanding of the pattern and roughly knew the frequency of the alternating lightning before he would be pulled above the gray fog by Mr. Fool. And now was the final day. Because of this, he had to go to the library to read through historical information involving ancient gods, so as to offer them to Mr. Fool. After passing through the partition area of the training field, Derek subconsciously looked inside and saw exploration members resting inside. It was the exploration team led by the 6-member council's chief, Colin Elliott. They had recently finished the exploration based on the information they had received from Jack, and they had returned to the City of Silver, where they were now in quarantine. Derek retracted his gaze with a somewhat heavy heart as he went all the way to the steeple and went to the 3rd floor where the library was. He was just about to walk to the bookshelf that held all the ancient books on legends when he caught a familiar figure through the corner of his eye. It was a fair and beautiful woman in her 30s. She wore a long black robe embroidered with mysterious purple patterns. Her curly silvery gray hair cascaded down. She was none other than the elder of the 6-member council, who had been imprisoned for a prolonged period of time. Lovia Tiffany. She swept her faint gray eyes over as Derek felt his soul being penetrated. He couldn't help but stiffen for a second. "Greetings, Elder Lovia." He hurriedly lowered his head as he pressed his hand to his chest. Lovia walked over and nodded gently. "I've been removed from quarantine." She turned and left after calmly saying that, as though she was making an announcement. Derek stood on the spot as a layer of cold sweat seeped out from his back. Why has she been released? The 6-member council has already determined that she's all right? Derek thought as his nerves tensed up in an abnormal fashion. Monday afternoon above the gray fog. Klein placed his elbows on the armrest as he crossed his fingers and watched as beams of crimson light lit up before receding into blurry figures. Then, he heard Miss Justice's brisk greeting. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool." Chapter 6:15. Grayish-white fog. While Miss Justice was doing the greetings, the hermit Catlia maintained her silence as she observed as she did before. She didn't involve herself in matters, as though she was an outsider at this gathering. She watched as Miss Justice and Miss Magician conjured their Roselle diary pages to pay off their previous debts. Then, she carefully glanced at Mr. Fool without daring to look straight at him. Yet, She still wasn't able to see further through the special gray fog. Her dark purple eyes were only capable of seeing clothes that were definitely conjured. With the 3 pages of Roselle's diary, Klein wasn't in a rush to read it like before. After all, he had already interacted and used a grade 0 sealed artifact, and knew what a uniqueness of a Beyonder pathway looked like. He had even intimidated such a divine artifact, so he believed that regardless of Emperor Roselle's content, there was nothing that could shock him greatly. Unless he was given a demoness blessing by some powerhouse with a unique ability, and temporarily became a woman. Klein joked inwardly, as he surveyed the long bronze table in interest. Ma'am Hermit's curiosity is different from Miss Justice and Company's. She pays great attention to the matter of Roselle's diary? Klein retracted his gaze, and took note of this discovery. Then he casually read the yellowish-brown goatskin. April 22nd. We plan on entering to explore the abyss. April 23rd. We followed the pitch-black ocean, passed through the liquid-like fog, and arrived at the mountain peak that resembled a monster. Behind it was endless black fog. It seemed to blanket an entire continent. However, looking at the bottom of the peak makes it seem endless and without limit. I had joked with Edwards that if I were to commit suicide by jumping off that cliff, I might never fall to the ground, forever in a state of falling. Upon seeing this, Klein nearly pricked up his brows. He couldn't believe that Roselle would dare to organize his own knights and sailors to explore the periphery of the region after seeing the abyss. Isn't he afraid of dying? Legend has it that it's a place that can corrupt everything, causing all life to perish. At this stage, Roselle definitely hadn't reached Sequence 4, and he wasn't a demigod. He was at best a Sequence 5, or even lower. If it were me, I definitely would have turned the boat around and reported it to the church. In that instant, Klein gained a deep understanding of the huge difference between him and Roselle. In addition, Roselle's description of the abyss's periphery had reminded Klein of the mysterious stone doors of Amon's mausoleum. A similar scene had appeared after the Church of Steam and Machinery's Archbishop Hormick's puppet made contact with it. I wonder what Roselle discovered there. At the very least, he didn't die from his exploration. He still had an exciting life after that. Klein moved his gaze down and read the remaining content on the diary page. April 24th. We proceeded down the peak in an attempt to probe deeper. The thick black fog is biting cold, as though it can erode flesh and the soul. Luckily, the Dark King I'm on board has certain items that resist this corruption, or I'll suspect that me and my Knights of the Apocalypse will become members of Farron's Undead Legion. It's very quiet, and we didn't discover anything. April 25th. We saw devils, but they were in the form of rotting corpses. Behind the black, jagged mountain, below a slush-filled opening that one cannot call a path, there were different devil corpses that were either in normal or unimaginable places. It was as though they had all been killed at the same moment. April 26th. Either corpses or silence. There's no end up ahead. The items on the Dark King has begun to show signs of corruption. I've seldom had fear over the past few years, but here, that fear of the unknown is like an invisible hand that clasps my heart tightly. I have to leave. I have to return. I can't stay here any longer. What happened after this? Emperor Roselle was very successful in escaping the abyss's periphery. Or did he encounter something else? What does the abnormality over there symbolize? An intense battle? Klein subconsciously had some sense of anticipation as he flipped to the second page, only to be let down that it wasn't connected. May 8th. My beloved Bernadette is almost 2. The older she grows, the more likable she is. She's indeed a young lady who doesn't let down the excellent genes of her mother and I. Hearing her clearly call me daddy and seeing her bubbly figure, I suddenly felt a sense of satisfaction. Ever since I transmigrated to this world, I've done many things. I can say that some aren't honorable, but I've not felt any shame about it, nor have I ever regretted it. On the one hand, this has to do with me finding it very difficult to curb my desires, making it easy for me to be influenced by my environment. I have to thank fate that I've not met a desire apostle from the devil pathway. According to the records, I would definitely succumb to Beyonders of this sequence. I might even be instantly killed. On the other hand, I still have a sense of alienation from this world. My parents in this world are very nice to me. I've also worked hard to make them proud. But I know that my feelings for them aren't substantial. Similarly, this is how I treat Matilda. It's more a possessive instinct rather than love. I have to admit that my mental state is like playing a role-playing game in virtual reality. My parents, brothers, and friends are all non-playable characters. I can devote some of my feelings to them, but never anything serious. Therefore, I can join all kinds of corrupted gatherings without any sense of guilt. I can face people I know well in a cold, ruthless manner. It's just like when I played the Elder Scrolls. I could slaughter an entire village just for a chicken. But after Bernadette was born, I realized that I had an additional sense of belonging to this world. I was no longer as estranged from it. This is my child, a living child of mine. Perhaps this is what so-called maturity is. Without children, it's impossible to realize this feeling. No, I don't even have a girlfriend. However, I have to be alert about this state of mind that's mentioned in this entry. It might not exist in the past, but it doesn't mean it wouldn't appear in the future. The higher the sequence, the greater one's godhood is than their humanity. Klein sighed silently as he flipped to the third diary page. January 6th, a brand new year, a brand new beginning. After advancing to artisan, I finally have the powers to do that thing. That is to create the mysterious silver plate in my memories. There is a high chance that my transmigration was a result of it. In fact, after I became a savant, I could already recall its appearance, as well as the strange symbols and patterns on its surface. But the past me could clearly sense that I wasn't able to replicate something like that. January 9th. I finally succeeded after repeated failures. Holding the silver plate filled with special symbols and patterns, I tried hard to inject my spirituality in a bid to activate it. An endless grayish-white fog seemed to surface before my eyes, but nothing happened. Is it a problem with the material, or am I lacking certain requisites? January 10th. According to my recollections of my transmigration experience, I restored my past state, believing that I no longer lacked anything. However, the mysterious silver plate only showed me the strange gray fog. It wasn't able to help me do anything. Since this doesn't work, how did I succeed in my transmigration back then? I temporarily gave up on my attempts, and I destroyed the silver plate I created. Perhaps when I'm a high-sequence beyonder, and become a demigod, I will have a way to interpret those patterns and symbols, to figure out the truth behind my transmigration. Yes, I'll definitely become a demigod. I'm the protagonist of this era. Grayish-white fog. The Emperor saw an endless grayish-white fog, after replicating the mysterious silver plate from Earth. Klein's eyes suddenly shrank when he read the diary entry. There happened to be an immutable endless gray fog beneath his feet. Could it be that our transmigrations have to do with this mysterious space? But why is the Emperor unable to enter, but I can? According to the Emperor's diary entries of the last few stages of his life, he definitely didn't crack the mystery of the silver plate. Otherwise, he wouldn't have not thought of this place when he was in his moment of great despair and mania. He wouldn't have not used this place as his crutch. Klein raised his head as his gaze landed outside the ancient palace. He recalled that deep in this mysterious space, there was a staircase of light that seemed to lead to heaven. It seemed to correspond to his sequence. The staircase appeared to be built for giants, and its destination was the gray fog, which seemed to support something that stood in midair. The secret of our transmigration lies there. Klein made the diary pages in his hand vanish before he leaned back into his chair, and said with a normal tone, "You may begin." Derek originally wished to bring forward his request to purchase the Sequence 6 potion formula after Solar High Priest, but Elder Lovia's release made him temporarily abandon his plans. He couldn't wait to mention everything that had happened, wishing to obtain the necessary guidance. Considering how this was still the transaction segment, he held back his desire as he waited in silence. There's something on Little Son's mind. Something unexpected happened in the City of Silver? Audrey thoughtfully retracted her gaze, and similarly didn't request to purchase anything. At this moment, Alger surveyed the area and voiced out, "I need the potion formula of Ocean Songster." Indeed, he's already a Sequence 6, a wind-blessed. Isn't he someone from the Church of Storms? Why is he looking for the ocean songster's potion formula elsewhere? Obtaining it internally from the church is a lot easier. He has secrets he wishes to keep from the Church of Storms. Or was he just pretending to be someone from the Church of Storms? Katlia instantly had many theories as she gently took note. I can help you take note. Upon noticing the hermit's response, Alger asked, Ma'am, is there anything you need? I can search for clues ahead of time, so as to trade for the potion formula. Chapter 6:16. Silver lining. What do I need? Katlia silently chuckled, having sensed that the hanged man was probing her with a very ordinary question. Any needs meant clues. Ignoring the fact that I've already obtained the potion formula for Sequence 4 Mysticologist of the Mystery Prior Pathway, and accumulating points for one of the main ingredients. Even without anything, I have no lack of corresponding resource channels, and far more than one. Katlia had another thought as she recalled the sea god scepter which Mr. Fool wielded. She then smiled and said, I need a mystical item at the demigod level. The kind with acceptable side effects. At that instant, Alger nearly retorted, asking her not to crack a joke. Even in the Church of Storms, one wasn't necessarily capable of obtaining a similar item for years, much less a Beyonder, who was obviously only a mid-sequence Beyonder. If I had an item at the demigod level without any real negative side effects, why wouldn't I keep it for my own use? Alger knew that the hermit was using mockery to respond to his attempt at sounding her out, but he wasn't as irascible as his peers. He slowly took a deep breath and said, I'll keep an eye out. But ma'am, you should know very well that just an effective clue towards such an item might be enough to cover the cost of an ocean songster's potion formula. Very staid, not easily angered. This is very different from the usual style of the Church of Storms. Was the conclusion of my first observation wrong? He's only disguising himself as a priest of the storm? No, I can't think of it that way. This might also be because he doesn't dare to flare up under Mr. Fool's watch. Or perhaps, he's just an odd one out in the Church of Storms. There might not be many, but it's not extremely rare. Katlia wasn't greedy. She didn't sound him out a second time as she nodded. I know. As the conversation between the two came to an end, no one made any requests during the transaction segment. A number of members already had the means to obtain whatever they needed, so there was no need to make any requests for purchases. It was mainly Audrey and Furs who were waiting for the subsequent potion formulas. Another reason stemmed from their financial situation or circumstances, and they weren't able to make any early expenditures. This included Emlyn, who was filled with desire for the Sanguine's Viscount inheritance, as well as Miss Magician, who wanted a mystical item. Indeed, as everyone slowly cast off their statuses as low-sequence Beyonders, advancements are no longer that fast. The rate of transactions will also rapidly drop. In the past, there was basically 1 or 2 deals every week, but now, it might be 2 to 3 weeks. In the future, it might even be 3 to 4 months. Without knowing whether it was for the better or worse, Klein nodded gently to indicate that it was time to engage in the free exchange. Audrey looked at Derek and waited for him to describe the unexpected situation at the City of Silver. Derek didn't let her expectations down. Before anyone could speak, he earnestly said, Elder Lovia has been released. I encountered her at the library. Shepherd Lovia has been released? Using flesh and blood. The entire team that she led was corrupted by the true creator. So how can she be without any problems? What is the 6-member council thinking? Klein originally wanted to say something along the lines of, if there's nothing wrong with Lovia, I'll chop off my head and gift it to the true creator to be kicked like a ball. However, considering how swears and curses involve deities in them, and might lead to terrible consequences, he rationally changed his thoughts. Of course, I don't have to be that careful with me above the gray fog. He sighed inwardly. Elder Lovia has been released? That shepherd? Audrey quickly recalled what the name meant. Back then, Little Sun had used Blasphemer Amon's possession, and Mr. Fool's helped to expose the fact that the entire exploration team had been corrupted by the true creator. As for the team, it was led by Lovia. Her job as a shepherd happened to correspond to the secret suppliant pathway of the true creator. Yes. Derek nodded earnestly as he looked towards the hanged man. Alger thought for a moment before asking. Has your chief returned to the City of Silver? Why would Mr. Hanged Man suddenly ask about this? All right. To release such an important figure, it's impossible that the other elders of the 6-member council wouldn't wait for the chief's return. If the chief has yet to return, and that they had decided this without his consent, it goes to show that the situation is even more terrible than one can imagine. It was so terrible that they couldn't even await his return. If the chief has already returned, then the reason for releasing Lovia has a high chance to do with the outcome of the exploration. This is because, according to Little Sun, this is the only exploration in recent times for the City of Silver. Sigh, why didn't I think of this? Audrey, you're still lacking in experience. Audrey reflected and consoled herself in thought. Yes, not long ago. Derek was surprised by Mr. Hanged Man's accurate guesses. At this moment, Furs, who had been listening quietly, combined what she knew from before and suddenly had an idea. Mr. Sun, could this be the situation? Your chief led the exploration team, and that little boy Jack, to seek out a path that leads to the outside world. But they realized that the power of the true creator is required. Haha, this isn't a lie I'm fabricating, but an inference of the facts. The father of that boy, Jack, belonged to the Aurora Order, and they were seeking the holy residence of the true creator before arriving where you are. Therefore, for the entire City of Silver, your chief decided to release Shepherd Lovia after returning. If that's really the case, Mr. Sun would be in grave danger, Audrey said with worry. Furs's words sank Derek's heart. At this moment, Alger shook his head. No, I have the exact opposite belief. Miss Magician's inference is identical to my theory, but I believe this will make it safer for the Sun. Why? Derek's heart calmed down as he asked. Isn't that simple? Balance. Klein scoffed inwardly. The danger of the true creator is noticeable by any sentient creature with eyes and a brain. Your chief will definitely not put all his chips on him. He definitely needs a force that can counterbalance the true creator. As for you, the one who exposed their ploy, you were possessed by Blasphemer Amon. So you might represent another possibility. The more Lovia and company wish harm upon you, the more the chief and the other elders will protect you. This way, they would turn a blind eye to whatever suspicious aspects you didn't manage to erase. Alger explained simply. This ends up being a silver lining? Furs was stunned. Mr. Hanged Man makes a lot of sense. When it comes to analyzing matters in the situation, I'm still far from matching him. Audrey felt somewhat depressed. She even thought of puffing her cheeks, but she immediately realized that it wasn't an elegant act. All she could do was keep those thoughts to herself. For the rest of the members, Emlyn, who didn't know much about Lovia, had a hard time keeping up. However, he knew about Jack and the repeated cycles, so he was barely able to understand the discussion. In order to break out of the City of Silver's conundrum, they released a danger that has the true creator involved? Emlyn inwardly made a guess. Compared to him, Katlia couldn't understand a word. She felt as though she was from a completely different world compared to the other members. I actually have a feeling of admiration despite my incomprehension of what they said. The last time I had this feeling was several years ago. Back then, I was still very weak. There were some inklings in the previous tarot gatherings, especially so when it involves the City of Silver, but never has it been as serious as this time. Also, why are they discussing the true creator and Blasphemer Amon so naturally? It should be the Blasphemer Amon I know of. They're only mid-sequence Beyonders. What have they actually done in the past? Katlia's confidence as a powerhouse suffered a setback at that very moment. After hearing Mr. Hanged Man's analysis, Derek first heaved a sigh of relief before asking with tense nerves, could this result in our City of Silver being destroyed by the fallen creator? He originally wished that Mr. Hanged Man could provide him with an answer that could relieve him, but he ended up hearing the man say in a deep voice, that possibility can't be ruled out. Then what should I do? Derek earnestly sought advice. Under the situation of us not understanding what your chief and the other elders of the 6-member council are up to, I cannot provide you with any suggestions, but I don't think you need to be in such a panic. Alger raised his head to glance at Mr. Fool, who was silently looking at the members from the end of the long bronze table. Tracing his gaze, Derek subconsciously looked over and saw Mr. Fool, whose extremely blurry figure was covered in the gray fog. He instantly felt a sense of serenity, and he couldn't help but recall that holy and powerful angel. Although I foiled several of the true creator's ploys, I'll definitely not last a second if I were to really clash with him. The situation will devolve into the fool coming to his doorstep, but the true creator finding the fool completely lacking. Klein maintained his casual listening state, without saying a word or showing any expression. Derek retracted his gaze and said to Alger, "Mr. Hanged Man, thank you for your help. I will try to figure out what Chief and the others are planning." With the matter coming to an end, Katlia deliberated before saying, "Was the blasphemer Amon you were talking about before referring to the ancestor of the Amon family in the Fourth Epic's Tudor Empire? The son of the creator?" Son of the creator? Audrey was stunned by what Ma'am Hermit said. She instinctively turned her head to the end of the long bronze table and discovered Mr. Fool sitting there calmly, as though he was tacitly confirming Amon's other identity. Chapter 617. The Mysterious Adam, the Son of the Creator? Alger was stunned by the hermit's description, as he couldn't help but twitch his brows. However, he didn't directly inquire further, because this could very likely expose certain matters. Besides, he was very confident that there would be other members asking. "The son of the creator?" Furs asked with piqued interest. She never expected that Amon had such a shocking identity, aside from the titles like Blasphemer and King of Angels. She was filled with curiosity over this. Katlia swept her a look and said without a change in tone, "Legend has it that back when the original creator split into the various deities and races, his body produced two babies. One of them was Blasphemer Amon. The mural inside Amon's mausoleum was somewhat different from your description. Back when Amon and Adam was born, the creator had just awoken and withdrew the authorities of the ancient gods. He was seated high on a holy mountain and was surrounded by angels as they praised him. There were no signs of him dying or splitting. That mural does have something in common with the City of Silver's historical records. Perhaps the creator had really awoken twice. And perhaps the original creator and Amon's father, the creator as recorded by the City of Silver, aren't the same person. Both of them have an inheritance relationship." As Klein listened to Ma'am Hermit's description, he began theorizing. Amon is actually the son of the creator. Such a status is in no way inferior to the true gods. As for Mr. Fool, our tarot club was able to easily purify his avatar and stop his possession. Audrey recalled the past matters and suddenly felt that she had unknowingly exceeded many ordinary beyonders. The circles and levels of knowledge exposure that the two groups had differed by more than 100 times. She asked with piqued interest, "Ma'am Hermit, do you know the other son of the creator?" "Adam," Katlia answered succinctly. Audrey was clearly taken aback. This was because her question only required a yes or no. After receiving the confirmation that she knew, she would ask for the details and make it clear that she was willing to pay for it. Who knew that Ma'am Hermit had directly given her the name Adam? She doesn't seem to care too much about such information. She's in control of a lot of information. Audrey managed to infer certain matters through this detail as her eyes darted about. "I've never heard of an important figure named Adam." "I haven't either. Apart from being recorded as the son of the creator, it's like he has never appeared before. There are nearly no traces of him in the history of the Fourth Epoch," Katlia answered frankly. "This Adam is very mysterious. I'm already rather well versed in the Fourth Epoch's 3 empires of Solomon, Tudor and Trunsoist, as well as the angel families that come under them. Yet I've never heard of him before. If it wasn't for a Rhodes who live-streamed the Church of Steam and Machinery's exploration of Amon's mausoleum, I wouldn't have even known his name. Has he long perished, or is he hidden in the dark while scheming something?" Klein sighed inwardly. Audrey subconsciously glanced at Mr. Hanged Man and discovered him shaking his head as well. Amon is a king of angels, so it doesn't make sense for Adam to not be one. There should be records in the City of Silver. Audrey looked at Derek. For some reason, Derek easily understood what was on Miss Justice's mind. He said in slight embarrassment, "We do not know about Adam, just like how we don't know about Amon. I was previously searching for ancient tomes related to the King of Angels. I believe that I was lacking in clearance, as my sequence was still low at that time. I will continue searching for information on this." King of Angels. Katlia moved her fingers indiscernibly as she memorized the phrase. She knew that Miss Justice would definitely answer if she asked. So without waiting, she directly asked, "Amon is a king of angels that all of you are referring to?" "Yes. To thank Ma'am Hermit for her generosity," Audrey explained in detail. In the records of the City of Silver, the Creator had many angels attending to him. Among them, the leaders of the angels who were closest to the throne of God were deemed King of Angels. We haven't managed to confirm many King of Angels. One of them is the Angel of Fate Ouroboros, who originates from the ancient tomes of the City of Silver. His title is Tail Devourer. The second is Medici, who Mr. Fool happened to mention. We are still unsure of his title. The third is a guess. We suspect that Amon is the Angel of Time among the King of Angels. Since he is a King of Angels, Adam, who is also a son of the Creator, is very likely one as well. Haven't managed to confirm many. I don't even know the term King of Angels, but you have already grasped half of them. That's not many. None of your sequences are higher than mine. Katlia nearly became speechless. Only at this point did Emlyn really understand the meaning behind a King of Angels. He decided to use these names to seek out traces of the King of Angels via the secret historical records the Sanguine had in their control after he returned to the real world. Katlia fell silent for 2 seconds before saying, "Mr. Sun, you were once possessed by Amon?" "Yes, it was his avatar," Derek answered honestly. "However, he was purified by Mr. Fool. I wasn't injured at all." Purified by Mr. Fool. Katlia couldn't hold back the urge to look at the end of the long bronze table. She originally imagined that she had a general idea of Mr. Fool's state, believing that he was still in a state of reawakening and was unable to use much of his powers. This was why he sought the identity of Sea God and obtained that scepter. However, the present situation shook the foundations of her speculation. She felt that Mr. Fool was like an iceberg. What was hidden beneath the surface was even more terrifying and unfathomable. He easily thwarted Amon's plans. Under certain situations, he can briefly break through the restrictions and produce strength at the level of a god. Katlia's heart sank as she didn't ask further. She cautiously shut her mouth. At this moment, Audrey had thought of something that puzzled her because of this topic. She proactively asked, "Ma'am Hermit, after Amon's avatar was purified by Mr. Fool, a worm with 12 transparent rings was left behind. It's said to be a worm of time. Is that correct?" Katlia recalled for 2 seconds before saying, "Yes." "Which pathway does it belong to? I mean, which Beyonder pathway does the Blasphemer pathway belong to?" Audrey pressed out of curiosity. Katlia answered directly without any thought, "The Marauder pathway. Legend has it that at the saint or angel level, they are able to fool fate and cheat the rules, becoming a parasite of time." Sounds very impressive. Audrey marveled inwardly before asking, "Then, what can a worm of time be used for?" "Nice question." Klein secretly cheered for Miss Justice. He pumped himself up as he waited for Ma'am Hermit to give the answer. He happened to have a worm of time in his junk pile. It's a material with rich spirituality and unique effects. It can be used in particular rituals, or be used to create high-level charms. But as for how, I'm not sure. After Katlia answered, she suddenly sighed. She recalled the nightmare of being constantly pursued by knowledge, as well as the massive amount of information that could seemingly burst her brains. But even so, she still didn't know a lot. If the hidden sage hadn't gone mad and could provide knowledge bit by bit, I'll actually be more than happy to learn from him. Katlia secretly sighed. All that matters is that it's useful. As for how it's used, I have other people to consult. Klein controlled the world with great satisfaction and looked at Emlyn. "Mr. Moon, I have something I would like to communicate with you in private." "Aren't the transactions over?" Emlyn nodded, feeling somewhat uncertain. "Okay. The world immediately requested for Mr. Fool's permission and successfully obtained the privilege of isolating everyone. Then, he looked at Emlyn White and said, "I wish for you to present to me every action which Leonard Mitchell made in your memories." "Why?" Emlyn asked in puzzlement. "It involves certain secrets." Klein controlled the world to answer succinctly. His true goal wasn't to buy that mystical item, but to observe Leonard Mitchell? That fellow has deep secrets. The world as well. For an investigation, he was willing to spend £7,500. However, that mystical item is indeed powerful. Isn't the world constantly seeking a way to eliminate the mental corruption in a beyonder characteristic? This is likely useful. Emlyn suppressed his wandering thoughts as he seriously recalled Leonard Mitchell from his point of view. With Mr. Fool's help, he conjured a video in the form of streaming light. When the streaming light landed in the world's hands, Klein quickly browsed through it. He confirmed that Leonard really knew the existence of the grandpa, but he was unable to determine if he understood the danger. Temporarily suppressing any corresponding thoughts, Klein removed the isolation barriers and allowed the Tarot Club members to continue. At this moment, Audrey was reminded of something by Mr. World's private communication. She hurriedly looked at Furs and asked in concern, "Miss Magician, did you discover any abnormalities at William Street?" "That will require Mr. World to answer you," Furs said, having been put into a difficult position. Without waiting for Miss Justice to speak again, Klein controlled the world and hoarsely replied, "There were abnormalities. But I have already informed the Church of Evernight and the Church of Steam. If there are any future problems, I might require your help." "All right," Audrey heaved a sigh of relief. Informed the Church of Evernight and Steam. This, Katlia found the description ludicrous. From what she knew, a secret organization like the Tarot Club was a natural enemy of the official Beyonders. There was no room for any compromises between the two, but the way the world had dealt with it, and the words he used had made it seem like the Tarot Club was an organization that cooperated with the official Beyonders. Colored by these feelings, she listened to the rest of the conversation before bowing and bidding farewell when Mr. Fool made the closing remark. Soon, Klein was the only one left above the gray fog. Chapter 618. Volunteer work. Second floor of the Sweet Lemon Bar, in the boss's room. Bilt Brando held a cigar as he stood by the window. He was looking out, and his eyes were out of focus as he wore a dark and terrifying expression. At this moment, a bodyguard entered, bent his back slightly, and carefully said, "Sir, Sothith has returned from the east. Let him in." Bilt tried hard to correct his expression. Sothith Yan was his assistant, an important member of the Adventurer Association. In less than a minute, Sothith, who was dressed in a linen shirt, brown jacket, and red headscarf, walked in. He looked to be in his 30s and had bronze skin. He had recessed eye sockets and a black mustache below and under his lips. He was obviously someone who spent most of his time at sea. Sothith bowed rather informally and sized up Bilt Brando. "Boss, something happened?" "Yes, something happened. From the looks of it, it will fail." Bilt didn't keep the matter from him as he sighed. "I have no idea how I'm going to answer that important figure." Without waiting for Sothith to answer, he asked, "Have there been any changes at the Eastern Front?" "Still the same as usual. The pirates are still after every ship they can plunder. They even target each other. The Navy is only able to guard the various colonial posts, and they're barely able to maintain smooth passage through the sea routes while protecting the relatively important ships. There are often sea battles with both sides obtaining victories at times," Sothith said as he shrugged his shoulders. "The eastern front of the Sonia Sea is a pirate's playground." Bilt sighed in agreement. Sothith thought for a moment and added, "There has been some recent news from the islands on the eastern front. Apparently it first originated from the Black Death." "Vice Admiral Ailment? What news is it?" Bilt asked, his interest piqued. Sothith said with a solemn and excited tone, "Vice Admiral Ailment really encountered an assassination attempt and was seriously injured. And the person who attacked her was the adventurer, Gehrman Sparrow." "Gehrman Sparrow?" Bilt blurted out. "Yes, it's him. He really is a powerhouse at the level of a pirate admiral. Even if it was a sneak attack, it happened on the Black Death. There were so many infamous pirates around, but he managed to successfully escape after dealing a heavy blow to Vice Admiral Ailment. He later hunted Wormtongue Mither. Sothith answered with affirmation while sighing. Bilt staggered before sighing. That's important news. There are very few powerhouses at the pirate admiral level among adventurers. To be able to deal a heavy blow to a pirate admiral on her flagship while alone. Such an operation can only be done if one is absolutely confident in themselves or crazy enough. Only a madman will infiltrate a pirate admiral's flagship in an attempt to assassinate her, instead of finding another spot. Having said that, his expression changed slightly. I met an adventurer named Gehrman Sparrow last night. For real? Sothith's pupil shrank as he asked solemnly. I can't be sure since I've never met the real Gehrman Sparrow, or seen his photograph or portrait. Bilt shook his head. Sothith thought for a moment and said, You can search for the newspapers from the Rorstad archipelago to confirm his identity. So many days have passed. There should be tourists that would have brought over the corresponding news report and Sonia Morning Post. Yes, the government offices, police stations, churches, and charity organizations will subscribe to the important newspapers of the Rorstad archipelago. The Rorstad archipelago was the biggest colonial grounds of the Lone Kingdom in the central Sonia Sea. Its influence radiated outward, so there was no doubt that Orvie Island, which was within a distance of 3 days of travel, was part of its domain of influence. The official organizations and churches all subscribed to the newspapers and magazines of the area, so any non-crucial news would be received in 3 to 4 days. All right. Bilt nodded as he probed deeper. Do you have the exact details of Gehrman Sparrow's assassination attempt on Vice Admiral Ailment? Sothith thought for a moment and said, It's said that Gehrman Sparrow is able to change into anyone, just like Vice Admiral Hurricane Kalangos. It's with that power that he successfully infiltrated the Black Death and found an opportunity to carry out the assassination. He can change into anyone. Bilt's eyes lit up. No, that won't do. That's a crazy guy who dares to infiltrate the Black Death to assassinate Vice Admiral Ailment. He causes one to instinctively fear him and distance themselves from him. The light in Bilt's eyes dimmed. Furthermore, I don't even know if he's the real one or not. He subconsciously shook his head. I wonder when the Nighthawks and Machinery Hivemind will take action and deal with the abnormality at William Street. I hope they do it as soon as possible. Amidst his thoughts, Klein left the gray fog and returned to the real world. After some consideration, he took out a piece of paper and laid it out on a brown desk. He wrote with a dark red fountain pen, asking about Mr. Azek's recent situation, before mentioning how he had discovered that someone had a parasite in him while he was searching for a mystical item that could steal the beyonder powers of others. Following that, he seemingly asked in passing if there was a way to avoid the parasite and inform the host. With this as a topic starter, he added how he learned from others about information regarding the Worm of Time that was related to high-sequence beyonders from the Marauder pathway. He also mentioned that he knew that such an item could be used as a sacrificial item in important rituals or as a material in high-level charms. However, he had no idea how to produce them. Phew. Klein put down the fountain pen, folded the letter, and brought the copper whistle to his lips. He blew at it forcefully. White bones spewed out like a fountain, forming a gigantic skeleton messenger. But this time, the messenger didn't bore out from downstairs, and it instead tore through the ceiling like many times before, looking down at the summoner from above. Klein knew that this wasn't because the messenger had become impolite again, but because he was staying on the first floor of an inn. He flicked his wrist and threw the letter like a dart, making it land accurately in the messenger's huge bony hand. The flames in the messenger's eye sockets flickered as though it was observing Klein, but ultimately nothing happened. Its body disintegrated into a waterfall made of bones as they drilled into the ground. After everything was done, Klein didn't spread open the paper crane. He erased what had been written and wrote the same content to seek advice from the Snake of Mercury, Willa Septon. This was because he realized something terrible. The paper crane wasn't a mystical item or beyonder weapon. It was an ordinary piece of paper that had been folded. After repeatedly having its content erased by an eraser, it was beginning to show signs of its structural integrity failing. In a few more tries, it might directly tear. I'll leave extremely important matters that require contact before considering it. For example, only when Mr. Isaac isn't sure how to bypass the grandpa to warn Leonard. Klein shook his head silently and rapidly packed up the items on his desk. In addition, he didn't dare to use the radio transceiver to contact Rhodes recently. This was because the powerhouse sent by the true creator was likely still loitering around the area in search for the all-black eyes aura. The scent of the gray fog was also equally able to attract the true creator's attention, allowing him to inform his believers. Today, I'll continue being a tourist and relax. Tomorrow, I'll begin searching for an opportunity to do real acting. Klein retracted his thoughts, draped on his coat, and took his top hat before walking out the inn. He planned on heading to the mountains outside Orvie Harbor to watch the sunset. This thought stemmed from a popular novel. Its author's name was Leanne Masting. This gentleman was born in Odora and had decided to permanently reside in Backland after the age of 20. His books had introduced the sunset at Mt. St. Draco with immense feelings, believing that it was the most beautiful scene he had ever seen. Klein rode a carriage out the city and walked to the foot of Mt. St. Draco. He took an hour before arriving at the peak of the not-so-tall mountain. Time passed as the sun slowly set, making the blue sea situated to the left of the mountain peak appear like a sea of fire. As for the emerald-green forests and the vast fields on the right, they seemed to be gilded. All the colors bloomed with the final touches of radiance in that instant before darkness gradually approached until it became dark. Ships entered the harbor as carriages drove into the city. The busy people began returning home on the roads parallel to the wheat fields and fruit gardens. When darkness enveloped the entire land, specks of warm light lit up one after another inside and outside the city. They were like resplendent gems that dotted the velvet night sky. "It's really beautiful," Klein admired for a moment, until all the lights from each family were reflected in his eyes. He turned around in silence and walked down the mountain path. Accompanied by the dark trees, he returned to the foot of the mountain, before walking for some distance, until he hired a carriage along the periphery of the port city. The carriage stably proceeded forward as the dim yellow halos from the iron-black elegant street lamps silently illuminated the ground, receding backwards into the distance. After some time, Klein returned to his inn. He took out his key and opened his door. There was a bed, a desk, and a chair in the room, silently sitting there in the rich darkness. They silently reflected some of the crimson luster. Klein closed the door very gently and walked to the window. He stood in the shadows created by the curtains and remained motionless for quite some time. The lights outside were still bright. Early the next morning, Klein turned on the tap and patted his face with ice-cold water, rejuvenating his entire body. He had already thought of a way to engage in true acting. It was still the hospital where death could occur at any moment. In the past, Klein had only circled the area without much focus. Loitering around had made it hard for him to find any suitable targets. This time, he planned on using some time of volunteer work to stay in the hospital for prolonged periods of time. He could provide hospice to the dying patients who temporarily didn't have their family beside them. By doing so, he could await the targets he needed. After having breakfast, Klein arrived at 10 Black Forest Street and entered the Orvie Hospice Foundation. This was a charity organization of the Church of the Evernight Goddess. One of its responsibilities was to provide the various hospitals with trained volunteers. Klein came to the registration booth and saw the female employee reading the papers. Hence, he lightly tapped the table to attract her attention. "Is there something I can help you with?" The lady lowered the papers and asked. "I wish to do some volunteer work," Klein said succinctly. "Name?" The lady looked up at him. Suddenly, her eyes froze as her right hand trembled. The fountain pen she had just picked up fell to the ground. In the papers in front of her was a portrait that looked almost realistic. The portrait's owner was that of the crazy and dangerous adventurer Gehrman Sparrow. Chapter 619. Unable to speak. Orvie Hospice Foundation. The lady responsible for volunteer registration hurriedly bent her back as she frantically searched for the fountain pen which had dropped. At this moment, Klein also noticed that she was reading a news report paper from a few days ago. It was back when his portrait and escapades were published. This area subscribes to newspapers from the Rorstad archipelago as well? From the time it takes to sail between the places. It's true that they can only read news from 3 to 4 days ago. If I had known earlier, I would have worn a new face and thought of a fake name before coming. Klein stood in front of the desk as he thought helplessly. The lady in her 30s finally picked up the fountain pen, raised her head, and said with a trembling voice, "Why you want to do volunteer work?" "Yes," Klein gave an affirmative answer. "But you're an adventurer." The mortified lady stammered for an excuse. She instinctively didn't want such an extremely dangerous person to do volunteer work. Being famous isn't necessarily a good thing. Forget it. I'll switch my appearance and name before coming again. Klein had the intention of giving up as he questioned her without any emotion. Who made the rules that adventurers can't do volunteer work? The lady responsible for the registration was on the brink of tears as she blurted out, "It wasn't me." The volunteer registration room became abnormally quiet. Klein was first taken aback before he felt like laughing. It took him a great deal of effort to maintain Gehrman Sparrow's image. After the lady calmed down, she sensed that her answer was clearly problematic. She forced a smile and said, "No, I mean this isn't regulated by anyone. My impression of adventurers is that they are very busy. They need to be out at sea and have very little time to do volunteer work." "That's them," Klein answered succinctly. The lady held her palm to her mouth as she revealed a smile. "All right, I'll immediately help you with your registration." As she spoke, she pulled out a form and handed it over. "Please fill it in. We will provide the corresponding training and volunteer jobs according to your requests. We will contact you, or you can always come over to inquire for any updates." She had already made up her mind not to put Gehrman Sparrow's form into the docket. Instead, she would hand it directly to the Foundation's person in charge and the police. "Goddess, why is this dangerous fellow here to do volunteer work?" She secretly drew a crimson moon on her chest. Klein nodded in silence. He took the form and sat down. Picking up a fountain pen, he began filling in his basic information. During this process, a man in a doctor's gown entered and asked, "Joanna, are there any new volunteers? We'll begin the morning training." Joanna, who was in charge of the registration, had the intention to shake her head. However, Gehrman Sparrow, who sat opposite her, gave her an intense sense of pressure even though he remained silent and didn't raise his head. She didn't dare to lie. "There is," she first replied to the man and then looked at Klein. "Mr. Sparrow, do you wish to receive the basic training for volunteer work now, or do you wish to wait until tomorrow?" Klein thought for a moment before saying, "Now." He planned on familiarizing himself first, allowing him to show his professionalism at volunteer work after changing his identity. That way, he could quickly help out at a hospital. Joanna clearly drew a breath and said, "Then follow Mr. Gravia after you are done filling in the form." "All right," Klein replied calmly. Half an hour later, the calm and polite adventurer, who had his madness hidden in him, stared at the abnormally dirty toilet in front of him. He held his breath and said, "Scrub it." "Right. You have already received the basic training on how to carry a patient. However, that isn't the most common task we do at a hospital. We're mainly in charge of cleaning a patient's vomit or changing and washing the linen, as well as maintaining the cleanliness of the washroom. Heh. Matters such as bandaging wounds are left to the professionals. We only need you to have the basics grasped." Gravia pinched his nose as he pointed to the stained toilets. "A volunteer has already demonstrated it to you. Please begin." "This is very different from what I imagined. Completely different." Klein's first reaction was to turn his back and leave, but he ultimately picked up the cleaning tools with a deadpan expression. He held back his disgust and went over before crouching down. Then, he leaned back a little as he extended his right arm. At noon, Klein took off his white gown and wore his top hat before leaving Orvie Hospice Foundation with a cold expression. He had serious second thoughts about continuing the volunteer work to find opportunities for real acting. Only when his carriage arrived at the Sweet Lemon Bar did he steel his resolve to continue the attempt. I have to become a Nimblewright master in 1350 and digest the potion, so as to begin seeking the clues to become a high-sequence beyonder. Klein emphasized his goal once again. He retracted his emotions and entered the Sweet Lemon Bar. He spent 8 pence for apple cider marinated pork ribs and a piece of buttered bread. Together with a cup of rye beer costing 1.5 pence, they formed Klein's lunch. He finished eating in an unhurried fashion before using a handkerchief to wipe his mouth. He said to the bartender, "Where's your boss? I have something to talk to him about." Since he had already verbally agreed to join the Adventurer Association, Klein naturally didn't plan on missing the opportunity to use this loose alliance. He planned to ask Bilt Brando to contact unaffiliated artisans or artisans who were willing to moonlight. He wanted an artisan to create an item like Azek's copper whistle, so he didn't need to set up a ritual and chant the incantations every time he summoned his messenger. It was complicated, troublesome, and a waste of time. Of course, if Bilt Brando didn't know an artisan, Klein didn't plan on forcing the matter. After all, joining the Adventurer Association didn't require him to pay. The bartender pointed to the staircase and said, "He's on the 2nd floor. If you've already agreed to join his association and have seen those bodyguards, then they'll let you up." Klein nodded indiscernibly and slowly got up before walking towards the staircase. Indeed, no guard stopped him. Only when he reached the 2nd floor did a bodyguard approach him to inquire about his purpose. Thanks to his reputation as Gehrman Sparrow, he easily met Bilt Brando again. He also saw an unfamiliar man beside him. "My friend Sothith Yan, an important member of the association." Bilt pointed to the man in a red headscarf. At the same time, he exchanged looks with the man and saw the seriousness and puzzlement in each other's eyes. After a simple greeting, Klein got a chair to sit on. He directly said, "I wish to obtain the help of an artisan. I wonder if the association is able to provide any clues." "Artisan?" Bilt sucked at his cigar and paused for a few seconds. He deliberated for a moment before saying, "I do know an artisan, but he's unwilling to meet strangers. This will bring him grave danger. If you have any requests, then I can be the middleman. I believe I have the required reputation to do so." To most churches, mid and low sequence beyonders, without any evil intentions, could be ignored at times. However, artisans needed to be dealt with indiscriminately. Otherwise, the mystical items they created could flood the markets, bringing about extreme unrest to human society. From the looks of it, the Adventurer Association which Bilt organized isn't just wasting money. At the very least, it has amassed quite a lot of resources and information channels. Klein took out the Murloc bladder, which he had long prepared. "I wish to make this into a ring, mainly to provide one with underwater mobility." He temporarily didn't mention the messenger, planning to test the artisan's ability and Bilt's reputation. If the messenger summoning incantation became widely known, it would create quite a bit of trouble. A sequence 9 beyonder characteristic isn't expensive. Even if Bilt succumbs to greed and usurps the created mystical item, it doesn't matter. After all, I have a bunch of charms from the Sea God domain. Furthermore, it's not like I can't find him to settle the debt. This is better. For him to be able to organize an adventurer association, he definitely has plenty of money and ingredients. As Klein's thoughts reeled, he couldn't help but size up Bilt. In that instant, Bilt shuddered for some baffling reason. All the hair on his back stood up. He felt as though Gehrman Sparrow's eyes looked like he had seen a treasure trove. As treasure, this wasn't a good experience at all. Bilt glanced at Sothith and forced a smile. "This is a Murloc's bladder, right? Making a material at this level into a mystical item basically wouldn't have any accidents. The artisan's fee is 150 pounds. You can pay me after it's crafted." "A very fair price." Klein nodded silently as he threw the Murloc bladder over. After Bilt caught it, he added, "Help me ask the artisan if he has the ability to fix the summoning ritual of a spirit world creature onto an item, which can be used for at least a year." "No problem." Bilt heaved a sigh of relief before signaling to Sothith with his eyes. Sothoth rubbed his depressed eye socket and took a step forward. Mr. Gehrman, would you be interested in heading out to sea soon? We already have a few pretty good ships. They're planning on hiring manpower to the Eastern Front to hunt pirates. Interesting. But my focus right now is to digest my potion. Klein calmly shook his head. Sothoth's smile froze before vanishing. He didn't say anything further, as it was a rejection from an adventurer at the pirate admiral level. He and Bilt had already found the relevant newspapers and confirmed the authenticity of Gehrman Sparrow. Klein slowly stood up and pressed his top hat to his chest before bowing slightly. Thank you for your help. Bilt's facial muscles twitched a little, as though he was holding back something. He had something to say, but he wasn't able to say it out loud. Finally, he slowly drew in a breath and smiled. I believe we should hope for a pleasant partnership. Klein sensed Bilt's and Sothoth's abnormality, but he suppressed his puzzlement and didn't ask. I can't ask. There will be trouble once I ask. I have to focus on digesting the potion. Klein turned around and walked to the door before turning the doorknob. Mr. Gehrman, Bilt suddenly said. The corner of Klein's mouth twitched as he calmly looked back. Nothing? Haha. I mean, as a member of the association, you can have cheaper drinks over here, Bilt said with a forced smile. Do you think I would have pressed on the matter? TSK. Klein gently nodded and opened the door to leave. After watching his back vanish, Bilt stared in a daze for 2 seconds before letting out a long sigh. Chapter 620. Stand-in mission. Inside the room, Sothoth pressed down on the edges of his eyes when he heard Bilt's sigh. He said in a deep voice, Boss, that important figure will arrive the day after tomorrow. Bilt's expression turned serious as he looked back. I know. We only have 2 choices. First, we ignore whether Gehrman Sparrow is worth trusting, and we entrust him with the mission. We can only hope for the best outcome. Second, we immediately abandon our business in Orvie, leaving with our cash and jewelry to become pirates at sea. I have the confidence to make most sailors and adventurers on the pirate hunter follow us. Sothoth paused before adding, Boss, back when you were an adventurer, leading our ship and hunting pirates, you were always this decisive and tenacious. I believe you have already made your decision. There's no need for me to do anything else. Haha, there's no need to suck up to me. Bilt smiled bitterly. I'm no longer the fearless pirate hunter who didn't fear blood or gunfire from before. Long periods of an easy and comfortable life have dulled my will. I don't even wish to seek out chances to advance. Those companions who had turned into monsters still live on in my mind. Phew. He exhaled as his expression instantly turned solemn. However, you're right. We don't have time to hesitate. We have to immediately make a decision. Having said that, Bilt turned his head and gestured at the window with his chin. Sothoth was taken aback for a moment before understanding what his boss meant. After leaving the Sweet Lemon Bar, Klein strolled by the side of the street, planning to hire a carriage at the crossroads. At this moment, he heard a window open above him and saw a figure jump down. Perhaps after experiencing the terrifying incidents involving the Antigonus family's notebook and Bancy Harbor's strange telegraph office, Klein's first reaction was that Bilt Brando was dead. He had suddenly died after his visit and was thrown down from upstairs, falling to the ground with his eyes wide open. This was just like how he saw Ray Bieber's mother dead in a reclining chair back then. The body was highly decomposed, and the eyeball fell to the floor because of the external disturbance. Similar thoughts flashed through his mind as Klein discerned the figure, who had fallen from upstairs, to be Sothoth Yan, not Bilt Brando. Furthermore, he looked normal, and was clearly still alive. Oh no, here comes trouble. Klein's heart skipped a beat, having a more accurate guess. If it were himself, he definitely would have pretended not to see Sothoth Yan jump off the building to intercept him, running before the man could even say a word, and until he shook him off his tail. It would be akin to how Admiral of Stars was being pursued by knowledge. Unfortunately, I'm currently Gehrman Sparrow. A crazy adventurer wouldn't flee because of such trivial matters. Sigh, getting to know myself better is an additional perk. Klein halted and watched as Sothoth firmly landed on the ground. He bowed with his hand placed over his chest. Mr. Gehrman Sparrow, We have a very important task to entrust you. Here it comes, Klein calmly replied. I won't be that free lately. This wouldn't waste too much of your time. You can first listen to what it is about before considering to reject or accept it, Sothith said earnestly. I'm afraid I have no choice but to accept it after hearing it. Actually it's still alright. If Bilt Brando and Sothith Yan threaten me to take the mission, I don't mind changing them into gold pounds and beyonder ingredients. Klein thought it through seriously and discovered that he didn't need to have too many reservations out at sea. Having the strength of a pirate admiral basically made him unstoppable in most areas. He took out the pocket watch in his inner pocket and opened it. I'm giving you 5 minutes. Alright, that's enough. Sothith pointed at the entrance to the sweet lemon bar behind Klein. Returning to the room, Klein glanced at the wall clock and said coldly, You still have 3 minutes and 12 seconds. His attitude gave Bilt a baffling sense of ease. He began to believe that Gehrman Sparrow definitely had the capabilities to complete the mission. Mr. Gehrman, I heard that you can transform into anyone, just like how Vice Admiral Hurricane Kalangos was formerly capable of doing so, Bilt hurriedly asked. Who revealed this matter? Klein pricked up his brows as his gaze towards Bilt turned gloomy. If news of Gehrman Sparrow being able to transform into anyone spread, it was quite troublesome for Klein. This was because this made others either think of creeping hunger, making them think of Kalangos' death, or they would think that he was a beyonder who had certain secrets and was suspected to be a faceless. The former would attract the attention of the Twilight Hermit Order, while the latter would attract the attention of the Church of the Evernight Goddess, who would send personnel to investigate. Of course, the Church of the Evernight Goddess wasn't a powerful force at sea, so Klein didn't need to worry too much about it. He just didn't wish to be in conflict with the Nighthawks. If that happened, he had no choice but to abandon his identity as Gehrman Sparrow. This was at the critical point where more and more people knew of the crazy and powerful adventurer, who had a soft heart, while he was being acknowledged and gaining feedback. Bilt sensed the change in Gehrman Sparrow's gaze as he tensed up. He chuckled and said, This was news released from the Black Death. Tracy, she's trying to seek revenge on me by doing so. One day, I'll successfully hunt her. Klein nodded slightly and said, You can think of it as real. He didn't explain how he received his powers of shapeshifting, as this didn't match Gehrman Sparrow's persona. Bilt heaved a sigh of relief and said after 2 seconds of silence, We're helping an important figure to search for a stand-in. Under Gehrman Sparrow's ambiguous gaze, he explained in detail, That important figure needs to independently deal with a secret matter that he doesn't want others to know of. Therefore, he needs a stand-in to represent him in dealing with his daily affairs. He would meet different guests and socialize with his mistress without revealing a problem. He will take 3 to 5 days to return. We had already found someone who looked like him, spending a great deal of time to correct his posture and accent, and we had informed the good news to the important figure, who knew that the tramp would overeat and suddenly die last night. That important figure is about to begin his operation. We do not have the time to look for another person who looks like him, so we can only seek your help. Isn't this the true acting opportunity I've been looking for? Klein was moved. However, he sharply noticed one point. To be addressed as an important figure by Bilt, leader of the Adventurer Association, it definitely meant that the person was an important figure. Matters that happened around an important figure were often not simple. It contained quite a considerable risk. Klein thought for a moment before asking in a deep tone, Do you think that this matter will be dangerous? No, as long as you aren't exposed, there shouldn't be any danger. You need to represent the important figure and appear at social conventions. Haha, no one would dare assassinate him. Yes, I know what you're worried about. You're afraid that this important figure would silence everyone who knows about this matter after it's done? Don't worry. The pirates have fabricated plenty of vicious rumors about him. So even if this matter succeeds, no one will believe it even if you divulge this in the future. It will only be treated as a joke, Bilt said with a smile as he spread his hands. Klein no longer bothered with the topic and switched to asking, What kind of payment are you offering? 1,000 pounds, and 3 chances to get the artisan to make something for you. Haha, I'll pay for all expenses apart from the materials. Bilt made an offer which he believed Gehrman Sparrow wasn't unable to resist based on what had been previously entrusted to him. It's not bad. Besides, it gives me a chance to do true acting. Klein took a look at the wall clock and said, I'll return and consider. I'll give you the answer in the evening. Regardless, he had to head above the gray fog to divine the level of danger. Considering how Bilt and Sothith were Sequence 7, or even Sequence 6 beyonders, Klein didn't directly request to head to the washroom in front of them to prevent them from sensing a problem. As the important figure's identity hadn't been revealed, Bilt wasn't too worried. He nodded. All right. I hope for a pleasant partnership. William Street. A stout man from Fasak who was nearly 2 meters tall was searching for clues. Suddenly, he felt his spiritual perception trigger as he looked up. Light which resembled the morning sun's rays surfaced around his body, illuminating the surrounding houses and street lamps, as though they were illusions. At the same time, sparks soared on the street as all kinds of supernatural phenomena appeared. Indeed, the Sauron family has sent people over. The man from Fasak, who had his suspicions, cast his gaze straight down the street. He saw nighthawks wearing red or black gloves as black gun barrels, covered with complicated patterns, extended out of the rooftops. They were aimed at him, while the surrounding passers-by didn't seem to notice anything amiss. He also saw the Church of Steam and Machinery's Archbishop of the Backlund Diocese, Hormick, and the Church of the Evernight Goddess's Archbishop of the Backlund Diocese, Saint Anthony. Immediately following that, he caught sight of members of the Sauron family, raising their hands above their heads through the corner of his eye. The powerful Fasak spies also did the same thing. They had decisively chosen to surrender. Resistance only spelled certain death. There was still a chance of being repatriated by surrendering. At 6:30 that evening, Klein once again came to the Sweet Lemon Bar, where he met Bilt and Sweet Lemon Bar. He expressionlessly said, "An advance of £500. Then, you will need to tell me who I'm supposed to change into." Bilt couldn't hold back his smile, as he gestured for Sothith to collect the funds from the safe while saying with a deep voice, "He's the kingdom's highest-ranking Navy commander of the Central Sonia Sea, His Excellency Admiral Emirius Revolt, a real demigod." Chapter 621. Governor General's Office Banquet. Admiral Emirius Revolt, a true demigod. Upon hearing Bilt's reveal, a few words immediately appeared in Klein's mind. "I'm sorry. Bye." Gehrman Sparrow pricked up his brows slightly as Bilt hurried to explain. This wouldn't influence the difficulty of the mission. There's no need for anyone to display a demigod's powers throughout the duration of the mission. He cleared his throat and forced a smile. To make the mission not as difficult, His Excellency has specially arranged for him to inspect the Orvi Naval Base for a few days. This way, he doesn't need to stay in the Central Sonia Sea's Navy headquarters, the City of Generosity Biome. As such, he will avoid Sea King John Cotman and the Governor-General of the Rorstad Archipelago, George Negan. He would avoid most of the subordinates he's familiar with, and he'll avoid his family who operates the family estate over there. He will also avoid his mistress who he's most familiar with. That is to say that you wouldn't need to face demigods, or the test of the masses. Here, there will only be 3 people who are familiar with His Excellency. The first is his secretary, Lieutenant Colonel Yuan. He belongs to MI9, and he's in charge of monitoring His Excellency. He likely uses many names, and I'm not sure which is his real name. The second person will be the local mistress His Excellency has here, a beautiful lady by the name of Cynthia. It's said that her ancestor was a noble before his title was stripped, and his family was exiled here. The third person is Orvi's Governor-General, Aston Revolt, the youngest brother of His Excellency. Earl Revolt from the House of Lords is their elder brother. It really doesn't sound too difficult. Besides, my divination results tell me that it's not too dangerous. Klein fell silent for a few seconds before nodding gently. "I need the detailed information regarding Emirius Revolt. We've already prepared everything. This is his photograph. These are the descriptions of any unique traits hidden on his body. These are the unique points of his accent. These are the common words he uses. These are the different reactions and attitudes he has towards different matters. Here is the detailed information regarding his interactions with Juan, Cynthia, and Aston. Bilt was delighted as he produced all the information he received from Admiral Emerius Revolt. Klein first took the photograph and saw a middle-aged gentleman with black hair and blue eyes. He had a strict and old-fashioned demeanor, and his hair was a lot more voluminous than most lone men. He nodded indiscernibly before looking up. I know this is a lot of information, but I believe that you can memorize them all in 2 days. You have to be very professional in such matters. Before Bilt finished his sentence, he subconsciously took a step back, because the person before him wasn't Gehrman Sparrow, but Emerius Revolt. The strict and arrogant vibes he exuded was no different from the actual person. Holy Lord of Storms, this is almost a miracle. Bilt looked him up and down, and he couldn't help but be amazed. However, you can be another 3 centimeters taller. Your legs can be thicker. But it's fine, there's no rush. His Excellency will arrive the day after tomorrow with the Imperial Navy's 1st Central Sonia Fleet. He would inspect the Orvi Naval Base in the morning and attend a banquet held at the Governor General's office. I have an invitation to it, and I can bring you there. You can watch from His Excellency's actions and the way he interacts with different people from the side. As he spoke, he received the 500 pounds that Sothith had taken out from the safe. He handed it to Klein and said, I hope for a pleasant partnership. Klein weighed the notes in his hand and studied it with a few glances before saying, I hope for a pleasant partnership. Backlund, William Street. As an inconspicuous member of the Red Gloves, Leonard Mitchell leaned on the outer wall of a house, awaiting the preliminary investigation work to end. He had his right leg raised slightly, with only his toes to the ground. It made him look desultory. After a while, he saw his teammate return with a somewhat complex expression. He was excited, puzzled, expectant, and nervous. Thompson, is there a conclusion? Leonard's heart stirred as he leaned over with a smile. Yeah. Thompson nodded and answered frankly. Both sides have spoken the truth. They have no way of lying in their dreams. Thompson, with his thin hair, wore his top hat once again. Their descriptions are uniform. Beneath this street is a ruin belonging to the 4th Epoch's Tudor dynasty. The entrance is indeed that abandoned chapel. No one knows if there's another entrance for now. Is that so? Leonard didn't delve into the details as he exchanged a few words before moving to the sidelines. Once again he leaned against the wall. He looked around and suppressed his voice. Old man, this is what you're good at. There's a Tudor family ruin hidden here. An elderly voice rang out in his mind. You're becoming more and more impolite. In our era, disrespect to high-ranking people implies being made into living sacrifices. Also, it's impossible for there to only be one Tudor family ruin in Backlund. Are they lying? Leonard asked softly. The elderly voice chuckled and said, No, they just don't know enough. If my theories are correct, this ruin likely belongs to the Tudor Trunsoist United Empire. What? Leonard was stunned. This was an ancient dynasty he had never heard of before. The slightly aged voice chuckled. What an unknowledgeable kid. After the Solomon Empire was first destroyed, it was replaced by the Tudor Trunsoist United Empire. Its double consul ruled all of the northern continent. Double consul? Leonard ruminated over this phrase. The slightly aged voice chuckled and sighed. In the ruins underground, there should be 41 inverted candlesticks on the left and 40 on the right. 2 of them look like they belong to the throne of a giant, and, it might be where Alista Tudor became Blood Emperor. Leonard frowned slightly before easing them. He said with a relaxed smile, There must be quite a lot of secrets hidden in there. Of course, but you aren't qualified to know it. The slightly aged voice sked. Leonard curled his lips indiscernibly and said, What follows next is the exploration of the ruins. The slightly aged voice chuckled before falling silent. A minute later, Leonard saw Archbishop St. Anthony and the Church of Steam's Archbishop Hormick end their conversation as they returned to their own camps. Immediately following that, Hormick ordered all machinery hivemind personnel to leave, leaving the area to the Church of the Evernight Goddesses Nighthawks. What happened? Upon seeing this scene, Leonard was filled with puzzlement. At that moment, All the Nighthawks heard Archbishop St. Anthony's voice. All Red Gloves gather. The other Nighthawks are to leave the mirror world. Find a reason to evacuate all the residents in the area, and promise them compensation for their property. After all the residents evacuate, the Red Gloves and I will destroy this ruin that stems from an evil era. Entry is forbidden. It will be directly destroyed. May the goddess bless us all. Leonard never expected such a development. 7:30 in the evening, at the Orvie Governor-General's office, Klein changed into Sothatha's appearance. He wore a black tailcoat and a bow tie of the same color. He followed Bilt into the banquets hall. The temperature inside was like that of spring. A gigantic chandelier hung from the ceiling, and the shimmering candlelight illuminated the grounds like it was daytime. In the corner on the right, there were musicians dressed in vests and bow ties playing a brisk tune. On the left were long tables. On top were roasted chicken, pan-fried foie gras, stewed lamb, Backlund-styled roasted goose, Odora lobsters with butter and cheese, and other delicacies. Despite the distance, Klein could still catch a whiff of the fragrance wafting over. He planned on getting a plate and filling it with food. At this moment, Bilt tugged at his collar in a reserved manner. He leaned his head over and suppressed his voice. Remember the etiquette as required by such banquets. Our current goal is to observe His Excellency's actions, so just taking a cup of wine would do. There's Misty champagne here, Ormer grape wine, and Southville red wine, all famous alcohols that are seldom seen outside. You can drink some, but not a lot. We have to maintain sufficient sobriety. Yes, try to just go through the motions when drinking. Klein retracted his gaze and nodded. The two of them took a cup of golden champagne, whose minute bubbles were like mist, from a red-vested waiter who passed by them. Then, they moved towards the banquet's highlight, where Emerius Revolt stood wearing his dark blue Navy Admiral's uniform. With their standing, they naturally had no way of approaching the Admiral. All they could do was observe his every action from a slight distance. Emerius's figure is normal. It doesn't look that fit. The corners of his mouth droops a little, indicating his actual age. He doesn't have a beard. His blue eyes seem to hide an authority that one cannot reject or defend against. His dark blue admiral uniform is starched well. There's a red lanyard at his shoulder, which joins to his chest where there are all sorts of medals. His sleeves have golden cuff links, accentuating his epaulets of the same color. His epaulets are split into 3 parts. From inside out, there's an embedded crown with rubies, the cross scepter and sword, for stars made of diamonds. Klein began scrutinizing, and used his faceless powers to memorize all the detailed characteristics of the Navy Admiral, as well as the attitude he used when talking to different people. During this process, he only took a sip of the misty champagne, and didn't take note of its taste. After he had mostly gathered all the information, Klein exhaled, and allowed his mind to rest. The great drain on his mind made him hungry. Hence, he placed the wine cup on the tray of a red-vested waiter, and he planned to get some food from the long table. At this moment, Bilt leaned over and said, "His Excellency has given me the signal. We will be meeting him at an agreed location." Klein retracted his gaze from the roasted chicken, and swept a cold glance at Bilt. Bilt shuddered as he hurriedly turned around, leading Gehrman Sparrow from the floor-to-ceiling window, and into the garden. After walking for nearly a minute in the secluded path, he paused and pointed at Klein's face. "You can change into His Excellency's appearance. Just pretend that you're that tramp who looks like him." Klein nodded gently, and extended his palm to wipe his face. He did so to conceal the disgusting tendrils and granules that might appear on his face while changing his appearance. By the time he lowered his palm, Bilt saw a middle-aged gentleman, who looked somewhat like Emerius Revolt. Very good. Bilt took a few steps forward, and came to the entrance of a sundries room. He extended his hand, and pushed open the unlocked door. Emerius Revolt was still wearing the eye-catching admiral's uniform. His body was standing sideways to the door as he observed the garden outside by the window. At this moment, he turned his head and cast his gaze onto the person who resembled him. The indescribable pressure and might made Klein involuntarily lower his head. Emerius Revolt's gaze didn't stop there, as it slowly moved to Bilt. he said without any tinge of emotion. This isn't the tramp you mentioned before. He's a beyonder. Chapter 622. Temporary contract. Upon hearing Amirius Revolt's descriptive words, which weren't a question, Bilt's forehead instantly broke out into a cold sweat. He turned Agape, hoping to explain himself, but finally, he plopped to his knees and said under the indescribable pressure, Admiral, Your Excellency, the tramp from before suddenly died of an illness. I had no choice but to find an adventurer who can shapeshift. At this moment in time, Klein wasn't too nervous. This was because Amirius Revolt had already noticed him during the banquet. There was no reason for him to only recognize him as a beyonder only now. For him to agree to their meeting and not directly avoid the risk meant that he didn't mind who Bilt had hired. Not worried at all. This is the confidence of a demigod. Otherwise, his beyonder pathway is able to avert disaster ahead of time. Klein raised his head with great difficulty as he cast his gaze towards the Navy Admiral beside him. Quite strong, Amirius Revolt commented without an expression. He continued looking at the genuflecting Bilt and said, Do not try to use your under-the-table smarts in front of me. An ordinary person and a beyonder in this world are different, and I'm a follower of order, making me be able to be certain of this. Of course, it's identical to what's written in the information. This admiral is inclined to expounding on certain things. I have to remember this point. This is a completely different style from me and Gehrman Sparrow. Klein retracted his gaze and thought as he cast it to the ground, as if he was unable to withstand the pressure. Amirius Revolt took one step forward. Lying is the first mistake you committed. Not being cautious is the second. A tramp you spent a great deal of effort on to groom had suddenly died, and all of a sudden, an adventurer who can shapeshift appears in front of you. Don't you find it a coincidence? Yes, it's quite coincidental. Klein nearly said the same thing. If not for his confirmation above the gray fog, he would have suspected if he was being set up by a legendary creature or a grade 0 sealed artifact. Bilt's pupils constricted as he snapped to his senses. He discovered that due to his horror and fear, all he thought about was to grasp at the final life-saving straw. He had lost the caution brought about from his experience, having not considered whether Gehrman Sparrow's appearance was a coincidence or not. The tramp had suddenly died on the day he arrived at the Sweet Lemon Bar. The more Bilt thought about it, the more he felt as though he had fallen for some intricately planned trap. As Amirius Revolt watched Bilt's expression change with enlightenment and regret, he nodded gently and said, My father, the deceased Earl Revolt, once taught me this. He said to pardon the first mistake of a subordinate. Bilt, you should be thankful for his benevolence. Bilt's tense mood eased instantly as he felt extremely moved. He thought Amirius Revolt, who was closer to a god than man, would execute him on the spot, so as to warn all the adventurers who were under him, who knew that he would choose to pardon him. Your Excellency, I. Bilt was momentarily unable to form a sentence. Amirius maintained his stern expression and said in a deep voice, There's a second half of the saying. That is, punish them for their second mistake. Bilt, do you know what you should do in the future? The genuflecting Bilt immediately straightened his back and pressed his right fist to his left chest. I'll be utmost loyal to you, Your Excellency. Amirius nodded and turned to Klein. What's your name? That depends on which identity you're asking about. Klein lampooned inwardly and calmly replied, Gehrman Sparrow. Amirius Revolt suddenly fell silent for 2 seconds, as the atmosphere in the sundry room seemed to freeze. Just as Klein couldn't help but feel uneasy, Amirius finally said, So it's you. Your Excellency, you sound as though you know me. I'm just an ordinary military informant. I only exchanged some bounty through you. I haven't even made any reimbursement claims. Klein silently mumbled as he felt less and less confident. Amirius nodded and said to Bilt and Klein, The plan will proceed as per normal. However, we need to sign a contract. A contract? Klein resisted the pressure with great difficulty, as he raised his head to look at Amirius. Amirius didn't provide a further explanation. He lifted up the paper and pen he had long prepared from the window sill, and wrote something on it. Every time he made contact with his pen, a golden glow would emit. The solemnity and holiness made it seem like he was penning a law. Klein narrowed his eyes slowly as his vision turned blurry. He couldn't help but lower his head again. After an unknown period of time, Emerius stopped writing and picked up a piece of paper. He said to Klein, "Sign your name at the end. If the conditions aren't satisfactory, you can choose not to sign." "Do you think I have or lack the guts to sign it?" Klein lampooned as he watched Bilt stand up. He received the pen and paper and handed it to Klein. The conditions on the piece of paper were few and simple. Most of them restricted Gehrman Sparrow's actions when acting as Emerius Revolt. It included, but wasn't limited to, voluntarily exposing any problems, not using his identity to engage in acts which were adversarial to Emerius, as well as not make any intimate contact with Miss Cynthia, etc. I thought such important figures wouldn't care about the chastity of their mistresses. This admiral is indeed an old-fashioned man. However, I'm not such a person either. Klein hid his curiosity and asked as though it was an academic question. What if Miss Cynthia chooses to make intimate contact with me? In between the lines, he was saying that being too distant or resistant made it easier for Cynthia to notice a problem. He was asking how he should balance the act. "It's fine," Emerius said without any expression. "During the contract's validity, you will not have any desire or lack the ability to do it when facing her. You can do that. This contract is rather powerful. Apart from a contract with spirit world creatures, this is the first time I'm seeing other contracts. Furthermore, the former used the power of the underworld. This contract is only between two parties. Is this a demigod beyond the power of Admiral Emerius? The Arbiter Pathway?" Klein shot a glance at the dates and discovered that it lasted 5 days. Is he confident that he will return within 5 days? Or is his level only capable of implementing a contract for 5 days? Klein read the conditions once again before taking the fountain pen and wrote the name, Gehrman Sparrow. With the final character written, he saw the words on the piece of paper emit a golden glow as they condensed into a resplendent luster. Amidst the resplendent luster, the piece of paper rapidly dissipated and vanished, as though it had fused with the world's rules. An invisible and faint gray fog gently rippled around him, as Klein clearly sensed layers of indescribable restrictions placed on him. These restrictions quickly melted into his body, temporarily becoming one with his spirit body and physical flesh. The gray fog can block out bad and good luck from external sources to a certain extent, but it's unable to screen a contract I signed. That's right. If it can screen it, the contract with the messenger wouldn't have been valid. Klein gazed at Emerius Revolt once again in enlightenment. The admiral had already converged his might, as he produced a dark gold charm in his palm. On it were the symbols and magical labels representing the Sword of Judgment. Its entire body was converged and somber, giving one the feeling that it was part of a codex. This is a high-level charm using my blood, a 4th epic ancient codex, and the royal family's grade 0 sealed artifact, Emerius said calmly. Its name is Ninth Law. When it's injected with minute amounts of spirituality, it can produce a might that's similar to mine. This can be done even by ordinary people. Without it, you'll find it very difficult to pretend to be me. Indeed, the might I show in a disguised state is only superficial. It's fine fooling others usually, but once there's a need to shock and awe any subordinate, that would be useless. Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Emerius continued. With your present strength, you should be able to withstand its usage. Through it, you can indicate a necessary restriction on the target, making them be in an extremely disadvantageous state. This way, even if a demigod were to sound you out, you'll be able to scare him away. If no mishaps happen at the end of everything, and if you had no need to use it, then it will be yours to keep. It can be used for a year. Klein was first taken aback, before he felt a strong sense of delight. He finally had another high-level charm. Ever since that time he used up the one, which was created with the mutated sun sacred emblem. Although such an item had a time limitation, and was single use, a pro was that it didn't have any negative side effects. Of course, the stringent requirements that were needed to create one made them very rare in number. As expected of a demigod, He's a lot more generous than Built. Bribing a tramp and an adventurer at the pirate admiral level are different in cost. As Klein thought in happiness, he silently extended his palm and received the high-level charm named Ninth Law. Then he saw Amirius remove his belt. After a brief silence, Klein kept his embarrassment in control as he took off his clothes without an expression on his face. Soon, he had switched clothes with Amirius and had donned the dark blue starched admiral's uniform. After watching Amirius and Built walk off through a secluded path in the garden, Klein calmly adjusted his buttons and turned to look at the glass window. Under the dark night and the crimson moonlight, the glass window was like a mirror. It vaguely reflected Klein's present looks. He had black hair which was neatly combed back, blue and profound eyes, slightly drooping cheeks, a beardless face, and an old-fashioned and stern demeanor, all while dressed in a dark blue attire with a lanyard, medals, and epaulets. Klein twitched the corners of his mouth as he silently said to himself, "From this moment forth, I'm a Navy admiral." Chapter 623. First night. As he touched the Ninth Law charm in his pocket, Klein adjusted his height and details regarding his appearance, making him look identical to Amirius Revolt. He walked out from the sundry room by using another door and walked down a silent corridor, back into the Governor-General's office. On the way, waiters and maidservants would occasionally pass by him, but no one dared to look straight at him. Just catching sight of his admiral uniform would have them scurrying to the sides as they bowed with their heads lowered. Any person of the same height could probably find his way into the banquet hall when donning these clothes. I have to say, acting as an important figure can be easier than acting like an ordinary person. Klein continued looking straight as he maintained his somber attitude. He walked towards a path paved with black brick in an unhurried fashion. He soon heard beautiful and melodic music as elegant wall lamps were burning with gas, illuminating the dark environment. Just as Klein approached a break room, he saw a room open. A middle-aged man had been waiting there as he walked over. The man had black hair and blue eyes. His facial features somewhat resemble Amirius, but his forehead was higher and his eyebags were puffy. The corners of his mouth didn't droop. He was none other than Amirius Revolt's youngest brother, Aston Revolt. This gentleman had once served in the Navy, and he had been promoted to colonel after rendering meritorious services in the southern continent's colonies. Later, he got sick of his military career, and together with political balance, he agreed to a switch in career and became the Governor-General. In the 5 to 6 years he was in Orvie, due to the importance placed on the island's location and resources, he pushed for the Revolt family to mass-purchase farmland and estates, allowing him to own plenty of property. This wasn't completely obtained through his powers either. Aston and the Revolt family had paid a sufficient price, and they even took loans with the bank. It wasn't like the Balam East Coast where land belonging to the Fasak people were forcefully bought at extremely low prices. Of course, if he wasn't Governor-General, then Orvie and his elder brother wouldn't be the highest commander of the Central Sonia Seas Navy, and the Revolt family wouldn't have so easily convinced their targets to sell such excellent farmland and estates. Here comes the test. Klein calmly approached and stopped in front of Aston Revolt. Aston looked around and asked in a deep voice, "Have you decided on that matter?" "What matter?" Klein first felt blank before he recalled an introduction in the information he received. If Aston requests for a private chat or asks for an answer to a certain matter, tell him that an answer will be given to him when departing from Orvie. Admiral Amirius really anticipated this. I just need to watch my attitude and tone. Yes, I also need to use the unique terms and pronunciations used by lone aristocrats. Klein gently nodded and sternly said, "Wait a few more days. The answer will be given to you when departing from Orvie." Aston didn't raise any doubts as he chuckled. "You seem to be waiting for something to give you the strength to decide. That matter that Admiral Amirius has to do himself?" Klein's heart stirred as he familiarly used the tone of high-level personnel. "Keep your conjectures to yourself." With that said, he took a step forward and walked towards the banquet hall. Aston Revolt focused on his elder brother's back, his expression gradually turning cold. He then shook his head slightly, After entering the banquet hall, Klein surveyed the area and walked towards the long table with food on it. From time to time, he would stop to exchange pleasantries with people who came near him. During this process, he realized that he didn't need to understand the topics raised in any conversation. All he needed to do was nod occasionally, allowing the conversation to harmoniously progress until its end. Indeed, the status of an important figure makes certain aspects of acting easy, but correspondingly, there are certain matters that can be difficult. Klein tore through one obstacle after another before finally arriving at the long table. He casually picked up a plate and told himself that Admiral Emerius liked fish, beef and lobster, while disliking chicken and goose. Therefore, he avoided food like the roasted chicken and Backlund-styled roasted goose. He picked up some beef, fried dragonbone fish, and Odora lobster with butter and cheese. As the metallic containers had their bottoms lined with asbestos, with red-hot charcoal burning under it or steaming hot water, all of the food maintained an appropriate temperature. Klein nearly broke down, destroying his persona when he took the first bite. He tried his best to maintain Admiral Emerius's image as he held his plate and chatted with the port city's member of parliament, navy suppliers, etc. He seriously listened to what they had to say, stuffing food into his mouth from time to time. He noticed that a young man in a tailcoat kept following behind him. He had neat, blonde hair that he combed backward. He had a receding hairline with light blue eyes. He looked handsome and gentlemanly, identical to the picture. Emerius's secretary, Juan. Klein controlled himself and didn't size him up. He wanted to fill his stomach before the end of the banquet. Once out of the Governor-General's office, Klein boarded the carriage, which was guarded by bodyguards. He sat beside the wine cabinet. The blonde secretary Juan followed him in. As his leather boots stepped onto the thick, soft carpet, he silently inched towards a spot opposite Klein. He sat there, but he only occupied a third of the seat. The carriage began moving as Juan took out a stack of documents from the black briefcase he carried. Your Excellency, this is the Orvie Naval Base's ledger for the year 1349. Klein extended his hand over and casually browsed through a few pages. What? £1 for a roll of toilet paper? The naval base's bathroom was renovated 20 times a year? Klein did some simple math and discovered all sorts of ridiculous line items. Isn't accounting such as this way too simple and obvious? I can even give them classes and specially teach them how to make claims. Klein seriously considered the attitude he should show. From his point of view, the greatest difficulty in disguising as Emerius was to fool Juan. This wasn't to say that Governor-General Aston and Miss Cynthia weren't as familiar with Admiral Emerius as his secretary. It was just that, as his younger brother, Aston might help his brother conceal the matter if he discovered something amiss after being given a hint. Similarly, as his mistress, Cynthia would be inclined to help conceal the matter for the Admiral as his dependent. Of course, the possibility that Cynthia was a spy couldn't be eliminated. There was still the matter of there being a chance of being used by a spy. But nothing could be as dangerous as Juan, whose duty was to monitor the Admiral. I can't expose any problems. What kind of attitude would Admiral Emerius have when faced with such a report? Go into a rage, or pretend to be in a rage? No, the Orvie Naval Base personnel wouldn't be that daring to hand over a clearly problematic report as though he were blind. They must have a certain level of confidence and a tacit understanding between them. As the information didn't mention this, Klein could only make a judgment based on his experience. Furthermore, he could confirm that either the Orvie Naval Base's report was beyond Admiral Emerius's expectations, or was determined to be of little importance. Just based on the schedule, it was something that could easily be dealt with. Regardless of the possibilities, I have to use the attitude that a person of high standing will usually employ. That is to not indicate my stance. Klein closed the documents and handed it back to the blonde secretary Juan. He said expressionlessly, "Put it on my desk." In between the lines, this sentence meant, "I'll look through it carefully." To others, it would mean something different based on their standpoints. If the Orvie Naval Base had done it without warning, this meant that the Admiral was somewhat dissatisfied and was awaiting an explanation. If the two had reached a tacit, mutual understanding on the matter. It meant that Admiral Emirius wished to obtain more favorable benefits in the matter. As for whether it would offend anyone, Klein didn't care. After all, he wouldn't be Emirius Revolt in a few days' time. He believed that a true demigod had the means to repress the anger of his subordinates. In addition, he was grateful that Emirius wasn't a demigod of the Church of Storms. Otherwise, he had to consider whether to nod his head and pass the report, or throw the document back in anger, while throwing a few people and passing into the sea to feed the fishes. Yes, Your Excellency. The blonde secretary, Juan, didn't change his expression. He stuffed the document back into his black briefcase, as though he had long expected such a response. On the way back, Klein leaned into the carriage according to Emirius Revolt's habits. He half closed his eyes as though he was contemplating certain matters, but in fact he wasn't thinking of anything. Juan maintained his silence and didn't speak at all. Human-height iron-black street lamps were quickly left behind as the carriage drove close to the naval base, before taking a bend into a house with a garden and lawn. Just as Klein walked up the steps, a butler opened the door for him as servants lined the two sides, reverently awaiting his entrance. The living room was decorated in a very classic manner. There were oil paintings of beautiful scenery hung up, limestone statues, simple and elegant vases, etc. A faint but lingering fragrance emanated in the room, one that reached into the heart. Klein, who should have relaxed, ended up tensing up as he saw a beautiful lady walk towards him in a home gown. She looked to be in her early 20s. Her blonde hair cascaded down, and when she cast her blue eyes over, it was as though there was a glow hidden within them. While filled with gentle feminineness, there were still some remnants of her youth. She was none other than Admiral Emirius's mistress, Cynthia. Klein held back his discomfort and allowed Emirius's stern face to reveal a smile as he widened his arms. Cynthia threw herself into his arms and tiptoed. With her cheeks by his cheek, she whispered with a smile, "Admiral, I've already heated the water for you in the bathtub." This means she had someone monitor the end of the banquet. Being a mistress isn't something simple either. Admiral Emirius does like to take hot baths, so as to relax his thoughts. In order to ignore how close their cheeks were, Klein allowed his thoughts to wander. As a straight man, he should have felt embarrassed, while also being rather glad to be approached by such a beautiful member of the opposite sex. However, the temporary contract made him have zero urges. Hence, all that was left was awkwardness. "Very good," Klein praised her as he gently pushed Cynthia away, having had nowhere to place them. Knowing that the Admiral didn't like to be intimate in front of the servants, Cynthia retreated and led Klein to the second floor. He was brought into the bathroom as he prepared a bathrobe for him. After doing all of this, Cynthia instructed the servants not to come to the second floor unless they heard the bell ring. Then, she returned to the bedroom, took off all her clothes and changed into a nightgown made of silk. Her nightgown revealed plenty of her chest. It was an alluring snow white, and deep in her cleavage was a special necklace pendant. It was like a miniaturized black rhinoceros horn, about the length of a finger segment. Cynthia took off the necklace and stuffed it under her pillow. Amidst her blushing and hesitation, she left the bedroom and came outside the bathroom where the Admiral was bathing. Mustering her strength, she pulled at the handle. Creak. Her hand paused. She realized that the bathroom's door had been locked from the inside at some point in time. With a blank look, Cynthia instinctively yanked at it again. Creak. Creak. The bathroom's door didn't budge an inch. Chapter 624. Warning: the bathroom was partitioned inside. The emanating steam covered the entire bathtub. Apart from his head, Klein's entire body was soaked in the hot water. He lay there in such great comfort that he didn't even wish to move his toes. What a beautiful night. If only there was no Cynthia outside. I still have to deal with her later. Klein sighed as he considered what excuse to use to avoid being intimate with her. In accordance with Admiral Emirius Revolt's traits, he decided to first use work as an excuse. After that would be the excuse of him not feeling well, him losing the ability to have sex, him needing some time to digest any medicine he had just taken, and how he had suddenly realized his true sexual orientation, making him find curly-haired baboons extremely attractive. As for whether this would damage the Admiral's image, Klein didn't feel the slightest bit of pressure. As long as he prevented Cynthia from suspecting that he was a fake Emirius Revolt, he would have perfectly completed his mission. The subsequent explanations for those excuses, and how he finds an excuse to explain his recovery, would all be Admiral Emirius's problem. What has that got to do with me, Gehrman Sparrow? And what has Gehrman Sparrow's ruined reputation have to do with me, Sherlock Moriarty? Klein stood up in satisfaction as he walked out to the dry partition while dropping wet. He got a bath towel and dried himself. After changing into a hanging bathrobe, Klein inhaled silently, as though he had unlocked a major enemy in his quest. He opened the door to the bathroom. Seeing the corridor empty, with only the light from the wall lamps on both sides illuminating the darkness, Klein felt slightly relieved and was no longer as tensed. This is almost the same feeling as challenging a pirate admiral. As he mumbled, he realized a serious problem. He had no idea which of the rooms was the master bedroom or study. Regardless, I have to inform Cynthia. Otherwise, it would make Admiral Emirius appear strange. Klein recalled the layout of similar houses in an attempt to accurately find the master bedroom. At this moment, the door to the room diagonally across him creaked open. Cynthia, who was draped in a silk nightgown, walked over. Her blonde hair appeared wet and messy as they cascaded down. There were even a few strands of hair fluttering in front of her blue eyes and bright red lips. It hid the glow in her eyes as her lips were somewhat closed. She appeared extremely alluring under the dim environment. The neckline of the silk nightgown was very open, as snow whiteness and a deep cleavage was reflected in Klein's eyes. Klein nearly raised his head to look at the ceiling to avoid the intense stimulation. Calm down, calm down. You are Emirius Revolt. Besides, you've seen a half-naked demoness before. Compared to an ailment maiden, this lady's charms are clearly insufficient. Wait, why am I thinking about demonesses? Who knows if they were formerly men or women? Klein maintained his gaze as he sized her up and down with a teasing tone. In that instant, he could sense that primal desire, but there was no response from his nether regions. This is the result of the temporary contract? In fact, Admiral Emirius didn't need to go through the trouble. Even if I have the urge, I'll be able to control myself. What kind of situation haven't I encountered before? Yes, Cynthia is a little different from what the records say. Isn't it said that she became Emirius's mistress about 1 to 2 years ago? With them not being able to meet each other most of the time, the Admiral has to coax her each time, as she hadn't had her pent-up desires fulfilled? Why is she the one taking the initiative today? Does she find her standing as his mistress unstable? Or has she been switched? Ever since Klein became a faceless, he felt that everyone was a fake. Cynthia's eyelids were lowered. The courage she had mustered disappeared bit by bit under Emirius's scrutiny. Her face was tainted with a horrified blush. She was embarrassed but also felt some pride. Then, she heard him calmly instruct, "Help me prepare some coffee and place it in my study. I have many things to deal with tonight. You don't have to wait for me." Cynthia raised her head suddenly, her embarrassed blushing still present. She had momentarily failed to understand what Admiral Emirius had said. Klein secretly inhaled and went forward to hug her before kissing her gently on the forehead. "I'll spend lots of time with you in a few days." Such a response came from the provided information, but he had slightly changed the terms. To be frank, if not for him having some prior understanding, Klein would have definitely believed that Admiral Emirius would wear the same stoic face while spending time with his mistress, even when having sex. He looked stern in whatever he said and did. However, this demigod also had his gentle side when it came to his speech. He was just not that great at saying lovey-dovey words. This also made him understand something else. Many people could only be viewed from the surface, and it was impossible to imagine what they were like in private. For a faceless to pull off a true disguise, they had to do meticulous investigations and have ample comprehension of the target. This was just like how a magician never performed unprepared. Cynthia revealed a clear look of disappointment, but she quickly restrained those feelings as she smiled. "All right, Admiral, your nightgown is in the room. A bathrobe isn't suitable for handling matters. This is identical to the information. She's rather considerate and knows how to be understanding. Klein watched as Cynthia turned and entered the room. She pulled at the bell. As for him, he took this opportunity to take off his bathrobe and change into a dark red nightgown with trousers of the same color. Cynthia attentively opened the door to the study and tidied up the slightly messy desk. Later, she waited for the maidservant to finish making the coffee before personally taking it and delivering it by hand. During this process, Klein read the documents and information, acting as though he looked extremely professional. But in fact, he had little idea about the data and designs plans of ironclad warships and sail battleships. He was no different from an illiterate. In this domain, all he knew were carriers, air domination, the main cannon guns and turrets. When he saw Cynthia silently leave and close the door behind her from the corner of his eye, Klein relaxed completely. He knew that he had finally survived the night. Inside the master bedroom, Cynthia pursed her lips as she took out the necklace under her pillow and tightly clasped the item, resembling a black rhinoceros horn, which was the length of a finger segment. She stood there and silently prayed, "O great mother tree of desire, please, make me more alluring," allowing Admiral Emirius to be even more mesmerized by me, so that he can gain extreme pleasure from me and bear me a child. Inside the quiet study, Klein flipped through the pile of documents placed in front of him. He followed the handling methods according to what the information indicated. He chose the simple ones and signed Emirius Revolt's name on them. The reason why he could mimic his signature was because Faceless allowed him to remember a target's unique traits, while Clown gave him the precise control needed. The complicated ones he couldn't understand had notes written with the following vibe: "Continue studying the matter." After busying himself until midnight, Klein reached out to cover his mouth and yawned slightly. "This won't do. I need to sleep. I have plenty of challenges tomorrow. I have to maintain sufficient strength and energy." Klein thought for a moment and gave up the idea of returning to the master bedroom. He raised his right hand and pressed down on his half-closed eyes. He pulled them down and moved his eyes to his nose bridge. Following that, Klein opened up two slits where Klein's eyes originally were, and used his flesh to produce a pair of fake eyes. After becoming a Faceless, I'm really beginning to resemble a monster. If only I had such a godly technique back in school. He sighed silently. He half leaned his body as he kept his real eyes closed while his fake eyes were left open to read the documents. His specialty as a clown allowed him to maintain his balance. He remained motionless like a stone statue. After an unknown period of time, Klein suddenly awoke from his dream. He sensed that there was a force attempting to pull him into a deep slumber before infiltrating him. "Who is it? I didn't do anything recently. Why would anyone enter my dream? That's not right. I'm now Admiral Emirius Revolt." Klein's heart stirred as he immediately changed his looks. Even in his dreams, he appeared to be that demigod. Meanwhile, he felt his consciousness tightly contract, as though it was avoiding something. This is different from an ordinary dream infiltration. I've clearly regained my lucidity, and I can escape by myself and wake up. But I'm unable to leave this dreamscape. Klein found plenty of oddities as he tried a few attempts. He knew very well that he was sleeping, and he could sense and control his body outside the dream. But no matter what he did, he was unable to wake up. Right on the heels of that, he saw a blurry white gas form an indiscernible figure. Klein narrowed his eyes slightly as he tore through the dream with his psyche, allowing his real body to move silently. Then, he put his palm into his pocket to touch the 9th law charm. At that moment, the blurry figure calmly said, "Do not participate in the matter regarding Aston. This is a warning." Quite impressive to warn a demigod. What is Aston and the others thinking of doing? Klein thought for a moment and emanated his spirituality, allowing the 9th law charm to produce a deep sense of dominance. Then, he imitated it and produced the same feeling in his dream. He said with a deep voice, "Who are you? Who do you represent?" The blurry figure was taken aback before he said with a laughing sigh, "As expected of Law Weaver Emirius. You actually managed to maintain your lucidity in such a situation." No. Although Emerius has a title of law weaver, he's not adept in such matters. You should say as expected of Lord Fool. Klein lampooned and sternly said, "Answer my question." The blurry figure chuckled. "You don't need to know who I am. As a demigod, you should be clear that everything is fated, likewise for the times. Do not resist the fate of an era, which is also the trend of the times. This will only make you a sacrifice of history." Fate of an era, the trend of the times, sacrifice of history. When he heard this, Klein suddenly thought of a term, Twilight Hermit Order. However, Klein didn't say a word, nor did he say those words. This was because Admiral Emerius would be him for the next few days. Seeing Law Weaver Emerius fall into silence, the blurry figure didn't say another word. It turned into a emanating white gas before vanishing from the dream. Chapter 625. Successful First Day Few. What exactly are Emerius and Aston Revolt scheming about? To attract a warning from the Twilight Hermit Order. Unless it can truly change the times and influence the direction of history, this ancient and secretive organization wouldn't even show itself or reveal its identity. Klein stood by the side of a magnificent castle in his dream, thoughtfully watching the spot where the blurry figure had disappeared from. Amidst his thoughts, he suddenly snapped awake, and was no longer as certain about his theory. The ploy which Admiral Emerius and his brother are planning might not really influence the trends of the times. Although the Twilight Hermit Order only involves itself in important matters, as a leader of another secret organization, Klein clearly knew that apart from carrying out the organization's own mission and values, it also provided help among members. From Emperor Roselle's diary, I can tell that the Twilight Hermit Order has members from different domains, standings, and sequences. Apart from a number of them fervently believing in the original creator, as they await the coming of Twilight and the awakening of the true God, the rest are only seeking to benefit themselves. Under such circumstances, as long as the organizer doesn't strictly implement order, there would naturally be missions entrusted between one another. Perhaps, the matter Aston Revolt is planning affects a particular member of the Twilight Hermit Order, who was made aware of it ahead of time. He entrusted the matter to another member, and used the excuse of the trend of the times to warn Emerius Revolt. Working from this logic, the concealed matter is rather interesting. With the level of the Twilight Hermit Order, Lawweaver Emerius, who's likely only a sequence 4, isn't too difficult a target to eliminate. I even suspect that they can mobilize up to 3 or more angels in a manner that's far superior to the 7 churches. Then, why didn't they take action directly, and instead gave an advanced warning? Back in Backland, if an angel were to appear, who knows if some true god would descend upon the land. Therefore, the Twilight Hermit Order had no choice but to use a more roundabout and discreet method to deal with Duke Negan. But this is the Orvie Island. Even high-sequence Beyonders aren't stationed here. The warning is because the Twilight Hermit Order advocates secrecy and doesn't wish to expose itself, so they're trying not to use overly intense methods. Or is it the case that the member who assigned the mission doesn't wish to see Emerius killed? To him, this admiral is still of use, so he's unwilling to give up on him, even if Emerius might be involved in something disadvantageous towards him. Then his true identity seems to be confined to certain circles. Klein made a bold assumption, but with no way of verifying it, he could only temporarily put the matter aside and throw it to the back of his mind. It has nothing to do with me, since it's the Twilight Hermit Order who's warning Admiral Emerius. As long as I don't involve myself with anything for the next few days, I should be able to last until the mission is completed. Everything else that develops afterward has nothing to do with me. With my present status, I'm still far from investigating the Twilight Hermit Order. I don't even have the right to probe deeper. Klein kept to his beliefs and turned his sights to his tarot club. I just discovered a problem. Other secret organizations have their own aims and values at their core, while mixing in the aid that members provide each other. As for our tarot club, it's more impressive. There are only missions given to each other, without any aims or values. No, there are aims and values among some of the members. For example, My dear Moon believes that this is an organization born to save the world. The fool Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh before exiting the dreamscape. He rubbed away the fake eyes and moved his real eyes back to their original position in a very fluid motion when he suddenly paused. That wasn't a simple dream infiltration. Klein frowned slightly as he recalled what had happened. That was because the power had first attempted to pull him into a deep slumber. Back then, I had already fallen asleep, so why would he do so? Captain once said that a nightmare can directly see a dream, so it's impossible to commit such a mistake. Therefore, the visitor hadn't used the beyonder powers of a nightmare, but something else. He located me via the spirit world, or after he knew my location, he used the sea of collective subconscious, as described by Ma'am Daly, to directly influence my beyonder powers? Yes, I'm more inclined to the second reason. That's the only thing that can explain why I couldn't escape my dream despite having regained lucidity. It's recorded in Emperor Rosel's diary that during his participation in the suspected Twilight Hermit Order, his entry into the gathering was based on a realistic dreamscape that encompassed the entire continent. A realistic dreamscape? Klein nodded and chuckled silently with a sigh. Admiral Emirius definitely didn't expect the Twilight Hermit Order's warning. It's only because he hired me. If it were anyone else, the stand-in would have already been exposed. That ninth law charm was well worth it. City of Silver, inside the spire, in the room belonging to Chief Colin Elliot, Derek Berg, who had been summoned, saw the grizzled, scarred demon hunter once again, as he felt uneasy. After he finished his greetings, Colin sized him up and asked, "You've advanced?" "Yes, I'm already a Sequence 7 Solar High Priest." Derek had long registered his advancement, so there was no need to hide the matter. Colin's light blue eyes, which had seen the vicissitudes of time, moved away as he casually asked, "Do you have the subsequent potion formulas?" The past Derek would have directly answered no, but the present him was used to thinking over it before answering. If I say no, my subsequent advancement with the lack of experience to support it will definitely make me suspicious. But if I were to answer yes, Chief might ask me to use it to exchange for items, so as to nurture more sun pathway beyonders. This will no doubt prove that I'm lying. As Derek's mind raced, he answered sincerely, "No." From his point of view, experience could be forged. Colin nodded, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. "In about 2 months, we'll arrange an exploration mission for you. The team will secure the route and ruins we found with the help of Jack, before we make a second clearing. I hope you will receive greater rewards then." "Yes, Your Excellency." Just as Derek answered, he suddenly recalled Shepherd Lovia. After daybreak, Klein changed into his clothes with the help of Cynthia, enjoyed a sumptuous breakfast, and took the carriage under the escort of the Admiral's bodyguards to the Orvie Naval Base. In the morning, under the companionship of the Rear Admirals and Colonels, he inspected the conditions of the ships, ordnance stores, the newly built training grounds, and the bathroom, which had been renovated 20 times over the past year. After having lunch at the Navy Mess Hall, Klein followed the schedule and summoned all officers above the rank of major to take in their reports. During this process, he had a thick black-bound notebook placed in front of him. Inside were some of the questions that Admiral Emirius had specially prepared for him. In the past few decades, due to the embezzlement of salaries and the harsh conditions sailors suffer, Orvie has had 17 revolts by the lower ranks. After the passing of the Imperial Navy latest act, and thanks to Your Excellency's guidance, we've already had such deep-seated cultural issues improved. There haven't been any such cases in the past 3 years. A colonel from the Orvie Naval Base stood on the spot and reported the entire situation. He would raise his head from time to look at Admiral Emirius Revolt, and discovered that he was listening very seriously while taking notes. The scribbling sounds made none of the officers dare to not be at their best. Similarly, they took note of the important points. The colonel, who received a positive response, unknowingly spoke up louder while reporting. "How boring." Klein held his fountain pen, and had randomly drawn creatures like turtles, cuttlefish, and dragons on his black-bound notebook. As he had never studied sketching before, his drawings were a ghastly sight to see. Later on, He even drew intersecting lines and began playing 5 in a row with himself, a game created by Emperor Roselle. Of course, his rich experience and his conscientiousness of his identity made him raise his head from time to give the reporter a stern look in the eye, while giving a nod of encouragement. As for what the person had said, he didn't pay any attention to it. All he did was occasionally remember a few words. During the briefing, Klein shot a glance at the blonde secretary Luan, to get him to represent himself to mention a few points that needed clarification. Everything followed the schedule. Towards the end, Klein flipped the black-bound notebook a few pages forward and used the accent of a lone aristocrat to recite the report which the secretary had drafted and the admiral had edited. Then, according to the actual situation, he used the common terms Amirius would use and added a few conjunctions and pet phrases, such as, "There are a few points, and let me continue on a few more points." It was already evening by the time the briefing ended. Under Luan's companionship, Klein left the Orvie naval base and headed for the residence of a naval supplier, where a banquet was held. At the banquet, they casually chatted about the price fluctuations of port goods. As for Klein, he mimicked Admiral Amirius, and he would mention a dated joke from Backlund from time to time, garnering a warm response from everyone as he was praised for his humor. After successfully acting until the banquet ended, Klein boarded the carriage, feeling exhausted in body and mind. "I have to take note of my speech and actions every minute and second. Engaging in true acting for a day is more tiring than battling a pirate admiral." Klein silently sighed as he closed his eyes halfway without a change in expression. He knew that the most difficult stage of the day wasn't over. He still had to deal with Cynthia. Inside the villa, Cynthia learned from the attendant who had gone out to make inquiries that Admiral Amirius was about to return. She quietly returned to her bedroom, took out the tiny black rhinoceros horn pendant, and used a metallic plate to scratch off tiny bits of powder, mixing it into the hot water inside a white porcelain teacup. After repeating the honorific name of the Mother Tree of Desire 7 times, she waited nearly a minute before lifting the teacup in hope, cleanly downing it. Chapter 626. Amirius's decision. Looking at the lights emanating out from the villa in the darkness, Klein spent several seconds mentally preparing himself before alighting the carriage. He followed the 3-layered staircase and came to the door, where the admiral's bodyguards and servants were lined up at the sides, before stepping in. Seeing Cynthia wearing conservative home clothes due to the existence of others, Klein silently heaved a sigh of relief as he maintained his stoic expression and slowly walked over. Cynthia's smile became more and more brilliant as she shifted the strands of her hair to the back of her ear, revealing her fair and slender neck. Her neckline didn't have any marks left behind by a necklace. Seeing Secretary Luan and the Admiral's bodyguards head for their own rooms, or moving outside the building to take up their patrolling positions, Klein pulled Cynthia into an embrace and said in a deep voice, "There's no need to prepare any hot water. Give me a quiet room. I need to spend the night alone." Cynthia used her eyes to express her puzzlement and blankness. Klein surveyed his surroundings and softly said, "Something unexpected happened. I need to enter an extremely quiet state to recover." As he spoke, he raised his right hand to pull at his collar, revealing a patch of faint-colored fleshy granules. His problematic physical condition with an abnormal reaction was an excuse Admiral Amirius had prepared for the tramp stand-in, so as to avoid Cynthia's attempts of intimacy without exposing a problem. To make it more convincing, Klein used his faceless powers to provide evidence. Cynthia turned agape as she nearly screamed. Thankfully, she covered her mouth in time and held it in. The moment Cynthia recovered from her shock, she immediately asked nervously, her concern and emotions evident, "Are you fine? Do you need to see a doctor?" "No, this is the price needed for powerful strength. I'll recover given 2 to 3 days of solitude." Klein had already found the excuse needed for the future. "Okay." Cynthia hurriedly helped Klein up to the second floor and led him into the quietest room. As for the master bedroom, she had already lit some scented candles and scattered some faint-smelling extract. so she didn't offer him some. Seeing the door close, Klein slowly exhaled. He changed out of his admiral's uniform and lied down in satisfaction. Not far away in the master bedroom, the worried and disappointed Cynthia was soaking herself in hot water before sleeping. She looked at the ceiling with an unfocused gaze, as she couldn't help but recall the exhortations of her parents from a few days ago. They wanted her to charm Admiral Emirius and hopefully be impregnated with his child. This way, their family would be able to take on more businesses with the Central Sonia Seas naval fleet. Admiral seems to have many matters hidden in his heart, so much that something abnormal has happened to his body. Cynthia's thoughts wandered as they slowly dispersed. Without her realizing it, she had fallen asleep. During this period, she found her digestive system turning warm as her body felt a little hot. In her dream, she seemed to see a pitch-black sky which was dotted with resplendent stars. One of them seemed to notice her gaze as it produced a brighter glow. The next morning, the invigorated Klein enjoyed a sumptuous breakfast, which was nothing spectacular to speak of. Once again, he was surrounded by the Admiral's bodyguards as he arrived at the Orvie naval base, and was placed in the most luxurious and spacious office. According to Admiral Emirius's habits, he would spend some alone time every 2 or 3 days to study and master his beyonder powers to a deeper extent and produce more effective techniques. Therefore, Klein spent most of the day without being disturbed, with him only needing to handle some simple work. Inside the quiet and spacious office, Klein leisurely paced about or flipped through books from the bookshelf. From time to time, he would put his palm into his pockets to touch the 9th law charm, to release some of its powerful might. This was to make Secretary Luan, who was outside, believe that there was nothing wrong with Admiral Emirius. After some time, Klein felt sleepy and decided to take a short nap. At this moment he heard knocking at the door. "There's something important." Klein frowned. Something that made Secretary Luan disturb Admiral Emirius's focused training was definitely nothing simple. "Come in." Klein converged his emotions and answered with a deep voice. The handsome blonde man Luan turned the handle and entered. He held a telegram in his hand. He said with a suppressed voice, "Your Excellency, a telegram from Backlund. Mr. Aston has been relieved of his post as Governor General. He will temporarily be replaced by the City Council's chairman. It's said that the new Governor General will arrive today." Aston Revolt has been relieved of his post as Governor General? Has their secret been discovered? That's right. The Twilight Hermit Order has already warned me, no Emirius. It means that they had long grasped the actual matter. With another member cranking the wheel, the matter will likely go through a series of position changes, putting an end to the matter. A warning was given the previous night, and action was taken today. They must have prepared for quite a while. Yes, that can be seen from the fact that the new Governor General will arrive today. Klein was first alarmed before he felt that the matter was within reason. He mimicked the attitude Admiral Emirius would have when faced with a major problem, by pacing back and forth, before saying with a stern expression, "I'm aware." Klein didn't express his views or pass any orders, appearing extremely staid. However, it was because he hadn't decided on a response. We have a saying from the Footaholic Empire: "Moving is not as good as staying put." I wonder if Roselle had translated this. Klein lampooned, as he gave a self-deprecating jest. Luan raised his head and glanced at Admiral Emirius without saying a word before silently leaving the office. Phew. Klein paced about once again, as he considered what Admiral Emirius would do if he were standing here. This was something important that had happened outside of his expectations. Therefore, Klein could only infer from Emirius's character, experiences, as well as some of the personal descriptions in the information provided to him. He's a conservative person. Even while he was a mid and low sequence beyonder, and was on all kinds of different ships, he very rarely took risks. He believes himself to be a lone aristocrat who values family, children, and emotions. He's a gentleman who's of good bearing, and garners the affection of women. At this point is open to debate. With his standing and status, even a curly-haired baboon would garner the affection of men and women. No, perhaps even more. At the very least, A curly-haired baboon doesn't tell dated jokes. Information ran through Klein's mind as they intertwined to form a multifaceted image of Admiral Emerius. While in his deep thought, he heard knocking at his door once again. "Come in." Klein instantly tensed up. Luan entered and pointed outside. "Your Excellency, Mr. Aston wishes to meet you." "Why is Aston here? He came to Emerius to seek his protection? Or does he plan on making a desperate struggle?" Klein narrowed his eyes slightly, realizing that he couldn't make a decision for Admiral Emerius. What would he do? After receiving a warning from the Twilight Hermit Order, he should already realize that the matter has been exposed. The target was long prepared, so with his conservative nature, it can be imagined that his decision would be. However, he greatly values family. He even provided some of Aston Revolt's interesting tidbits. It's not hard to tell that there's the concern and love for his younger brother in this matter. He doesn't like cannabis and tobacco. Drinking is just for socializing purposes. Apart from being a little caught up with beautiful women, there's nothing seriously wrong with him. He greatly values family. Family. Klein's thoughts raced as he fully immersed himself in Emerius's identity, fully experiencing his hidden feelings for his family and the importance he placed on it. Family. At that instant, he seemed to turn into Emerius, but he was able to analyze the various problems in a detached manner. After nearly 20 seconds of silence, Klein heard himself using a somewhat unfamiliar tone, saying, "Tell him that I have many matters to deal with. I don't have the time to meet him. Also, buy him a ticket back to Backlund." Luan seemed to have expected it as he retracted his gaze and replied, as though everything was normal. "Yes, Your Excellency." As he watched Luan leave the office to find Aston Revolt outside, Klein gently sighed like the real Emerius Revolt. He knew that Emerius would have made the same choice if he had returned early. This was family, something he valued greatly. With their scheme completely exposed, there was no way Emerius would have exhausted his last chip on a bet and place his family at risk of destruction. As long as he didn't participate in it, and as long as he's still a demigod, the Revolt family wouldn't suffer any overly serious damage, even if he isn't able to remain as the highest commander of Central Sonia Sea. And to get his secretary to buy his tickets for him made it clear that Emerius still treated Aston as his brother. It was a warning to others not to harm him before they figured out what was happening. After nearly a minute, Luan returned and said, "Your Excellency, Mr. Aston has left. Emerius greatly values family." Klein fell silent for 2 seconds before asking in a deep voice, his back facing his secretary, "Did he say anything?" Luan answered truthfully, "He said that you are indeed a cold person by nature." The corners of Klein's lips curled slightly as he produced an unfeeling smile. This was an instinctive reaction. However, with him completely in character as Emerius, he believed that the Admiral would have had the same reaction. The feeling and emotions were the same. For the rest of the time, Klein sat in his office and didn't meet anyone, nor did he deal with any official business. All he did was occasionally listen to his secretary report to him about the situation on Oravi Island. Nothing happened until the arrival of the new Governor-General. In the evening, he didn't attend the banquet he was supposed to attend, and he returned to his villa. As he saw Cynthia walk towards him, he hugged her. Then he calmly said, "Aston has been relieved of his post as Governor-General." All his sighs and pain seemed to be condensed into that seemingly emotionless sentence. "I heard about it. It should be fine, right?" Cynthia asked anxiously. Klein closed his eyes and didn't mention it again. All he did was give soft, terse reply. That sentence was the most obvious expression of his emotions as a stern, old-fashioned, and conservative high-ranking man. Chapter 627. Late into the night, Cynthia could vaguely sense the deep pain and helplessness inside Admiral Emerius's heart. Without speaking further, she hugged him tightly and used her company to calm his mood. After a simple dinner, Klein took a hot bath and entered the quietest guest room once again. He got into bed and stared at the ceiling in a daze. Klein knew that with him having fully immersed himself in the character of Admiral Emerius's helplessness towards fate and the pain he needed to hide had resonated with his past experiences. If I hadn't figured out the concept of getting into character and being detached, then I might have lost myself. Haha, this is like some actors in my past life. They get too into character and are unable to detach themselves from it, causing them to suffer from mental problems. And to a beyonder, mental problems might end up magnified. As Klein wallowed in his gloom, he got to learn what kind of person he was. I never expected that a Navy admiral who enjoys a high standing, a demigod saint, would still be faced with such helpless and painful experiences. Strength can bring abundance, but it's not a solution to everything. Everyone wears masks, and this is the truest side of a demigod. Klein watched as the crimson moonlight turned brighter, dyeing all the furniture in the room red. At that moment, through the resonating feelings with Admiral Amirius's experience and the contrasting differences, as well as the experience from his previous acting, Klein established a more multifaceted and realistic image of Amirius. He also gained a clearer picture of his blurry self. A person who's very sentimental. A person from Earth. But to a certain extent, a person who has been reconstructed into a new person because of the fusion with Klein Moretti's memory fragments. A person who didn't spend too much time with the Nighthawks, but has had that period of time deeply influence his actions and choices. A person who tries to play safe and is afraid of danger, but is able to change his mind at the critical moment. A person who truly wants to skive, eat delicious food, travel, and enjoy life, but he has no choice but to be busy with more important matters. A person who likes beautiful women, but he doesn't give himself up to pleasure to keep to his principles. A person who loves money, but is willing to spend large sums of money for his siblings. A person who hides his pain inside while showing a smile to others. A person who's used to lampooning inwardly, but appears gentlemanly on the surface. A person who can overcome his psychological traumas but never crosses his bottom line. A person who feels embarrassed for his acting. He's also a guardian, a miserable wretch that is constantly fighting against threats and madness. The corners of Klein's mouth curled up as he silently added. These thoughts flashed through his mind as he seemed to come into contact with his true self. Without realizing it, Klein fell asleep, his body and mind at peace. Inside the master bedroom, Cynthia had also fallen asleep. She was dressed in a nightgown with her legs bare. She had a few layers of her blanket in between her legs as she gently grinded against them. Her hands subconsciously scratched her skin, forming red streaks across them as tiny bumps were produced. In her dream, she saw the illusory and surreal sea of stars, as well as that bright star that emitted its light at her. Her vision was pulled closer to it, as she could slowly discern the star. Phew! Klein suddenly awoke from his dream, as he still had an indescribable scene still seemingly burned into his eyes. Why did I have such a dream? He frowned as he turned his head in disbelief. Just now, not only had he dreamed of Cynthia, who was dressed in a silk nightgown, but he also had a sexual relationship with her. He even dreamed of the naked body of Demoness of Pleasure Sharon, the exquisite doll-like Miss Sharon, Miss Justice whose looks were relatively blurry, Trissy-cheeked, Tracy, and all the beautiful women he had met before. Then, he gave himself up to pleasure as he engaged in a myriad of positions. To most beyonders and ordinary people, this might have been a normal response from suppressing his body when recently faced with temptation. But as a seer, a dream had a very special meaning. Klein quickly observed his body and realized he was still erect, semen flooding out from his penis and causing stains everywhere. This isn't a seer's dream revelation, but the result of an external influence. There's an enemy. Klein was alarmed as he quickly made up his mind. At the same time, he cautiously got out of bed and quickly changed into his admiral uniform. This way, he had the ninth law charm and creeping hunger on him, equipping him with potent self-preservation powers. As he wasn't clear of the present situation, Klein didn't attempt to head above the gray fog. He continued viewing himself as Amirius. With a staid expression, Klein carefully walked to the door and reached out his hand to grab the handle. At that instant, he seemed to finally find the connection with the real world, as he heard the chaos and din outside the door. There were clear chewing sounds, debaucherous moaning, angry roaring and sharp urging. What exactly happened? Everything was normal just moments ago. Klein gulped a mouthful of saliva, as he used cogitation to maintain the necessary calm. He had been using spirit vision to observe the situation outside the villa every day, and had not discovered any problems. Where are the Admiral's bodyguards? Where's Secretary Luan? Klein found the entire ordeal strange and terrifying the more he considered the situation before him. He touched the ninth law charm with one hand and made the deep domineering aura emanate, repressing the unease that was wafting through the air. Exerting strength in his left hand, Klein twisted the handle and opened the door. Before he took a step forward, he saw a red-vested attendant sitting opposite him. The attendant had mini-cooked and raw food placed in front of him. There was steak, mutton, dragon bone fish, and Orvie lobster. At this moment, the attendant picked up a huge fish that seemed to have just stopped struggling, raised his head, and smiled at Klein with a turbid look. "Admiral, I have always envied your food." His stomach was different from before. It was bloated as though he was 7 or 8 months pregnant. Just as he said that, the attendant raised his arms and bit into the raw dragon bone fish, forcefully ripping out a piece of thick flesh. Fresh red blood dribbled from the corners of his mouth, as his chewing sounds sent a chill down Klein's back. The attendant hurriedly gulped as he swallowed the food in his mouth. His bloated stomach trembled, as though he would blow up at any moment. This is the instinctive reaction to restrict one's appetite. Klein observed the attendant carefully, and for some reason, he recalled the tramp stand-in, who had died of a sudden illness due to gorging. He didn't spend too much time thinking, or making attempts to rescue the attendant, who was ravenously consuming the food. This was because he knew that nothing would be effective unless he resolved the matter at its roots. Klein moved his feet and followed his spiritual intuition's guidance, carefully walking towards the master bedroom. At the door there were 2 maidservants. One of them was sitting on the other as she bent her back, strangling the other by the neck. Wearing a beaming smile, she shook the maidservant beneath her as she hurriedly urged her. Quickly praise me. Quickly praise me. She desires acknowledgement." Klein frowned and took a few steps closer, grabbing onto the collar of the maidservant at the very top. He threw the maidservant to the other side of the wall, slamming her to the wall with a force strong enough to make anyone faint. However, this didn't prevent the maidservant from getting to her feet. The maidservant at the bottom kept yawning without opening her eyes. Even though her neck was being wrangled, she appeared as though she hadn't had enough sleep. Such a scene. Klein instantly had the urge to escape and seek help from the church or military. However, the strongest person on Orvie Island was none other than Admiral Emirius. And I'm Emirius at the moment. However, once the situation turns for the worse, I should flee when the time calls for it. I shouldn't act at the cost of my life. Klein pushed open the ajar master bedroom door, his scalp tingling with numbness. The first thing he heard behind the door was pleasurable moaning that gave itself up to one's primal instincts. Following that, a smell that made his heart race and sent blood gushing to his nether regions inundated his olfactory senses. In addition, there was an eclectic mix of all sorts of bodily fluids. A scene of indulging pleasure couldn't help but surface in Klein's mind right on the heels of that. Klein saw the blonde secretary Luan. He stood by the door, looking inside with an overlooking and cold manner. His arrogance was extremely real. Upon sensing someone enter, he turned his head and discovered it was Admiral Emirius. His expression and gaze didn't change, as though he was looking at an ordinary, unimportant person. This secretary is usually very reverent, but he's actually such a prideful person? Klein originally wanted to question Luan, who seemed to possess some reason, but he saw him shift his gaze to look into the middle of the master bedroom from a height. He only looks normal. Klein traced Luan's gaze and discovered a fair body that was 3 meters tall in the middle of the master bedroom. It had brownish-green lumps growing on its surface that resembled tree warts. Some parts were cracked open, revealing organs that resembled flowers. It had the bodyguards and the male attendants gathered around it as they either stood or knelt, prostrating or floating as they mated with those organs, letting out deep grunting sounds. The other bodyguards and maidservants of varying numbers were scattered across the carpet, enjoying each other's bodies to their heart's content. In addition, tree worts and flowers grew from the tall fair body, as well as brown branches that extended out as they participated in every promiscuous act of pleasure with the people present. What kind of monster is this? Klein had his knowledge of mysticism overturned once again. He lowered his left palm and prepared for battle. At this moment, the terrifying body which towered 3 meters tall turned a head over. It was a female. She had blonde hair and blue eyes. She had a high nose bridge and plump lips. She was none other than the beautiful Cynthia with hints of her youthfulness. As the tree branches danced while the flowers opened, Cynthia looked down at Klein with flushed cheeks as she said with hints of embarrassment, "Admiral, I want to have a child with you." Chapter 628. Prohibition upon seeing Cynthia's huge fair body with tree worts and flowers growing on it, as though she was a tree, as well as hearing her shy, reluctant request. Klein couldn't help but shudder as his hair stood on end. Such a scene exceeded a horror conceivable by human imagination. He had never encountered something like this even in his dreams. If he were himself back when facing Megos and Tingen, Klein definitely would have been affected by such a scene. He would have temporarily lost his ability to react due to the horror and panic. But after experiencing so much, he was an experienced beyonder in the true sense of the word. In the moment that Cynthia's words entered his ears, the glove on his left hand had already changed colors. It had turned black, emitting a noble and sinister feeling. This meant that Klein had activated creeping hunger and had switched to Wormtongue Mither's soul, giving him the powers of a baron of corruption. At that instant he distorted Cynthia's words, turning "Admiral, I want to have a child with you" to "Admiral, I only wish to have a child with you." This way, Klein believed that the bodyguards and male attendants around the tree-like monster would be pushed away, far away by Cynthia, after having her will distorted, giving them a chance for a breather. As for whether he would expose himself as a fake Admiral Emirius, he didn't care. At this moment, anyone who was still bothered about whether the true acting would be successful would definitely be someone with a serious case of obsessive-compulsive disorder. And he clearly wasn't. In addition, in an environment with all sorts of desires being magnified to the limit, Klein suspected that the others who had been influenced weren't paying attention to the battle or the actual situation. The Baron of Corruption's distortion power was activated silently, but Klein was appalled to discover that nothing changed with Cynthia or the men's actions. They weren't affected at all. "I've already used distortion. The mutated Cynthia is able to directly resist such an influence." Klein's pupils constricted as he hurriedly jumped to the side. A brown tree branch sprouted out from where he was standing as a sticky flower bloomed at its tip. The flower was abnormally large. As it bloomed, it seemed like it was about to swallow a person whole. Although Klein had never seen cannibalistic flowers in the southern continent's rainforests, he didn't believe that they were any less terrifying or ridiculous as the one before him. Pa, pa, pa. Similar branches drilled out from the walls, floor, and ceiling as they chased after Klein with their moist flowers. During this process, the flowers bit down on Secretary Luan's head, as well as the bodyguards, male attendants, and maidservants who were gyrating in pleasure on the surrounding carpet. At this moment, having learned the lesson that his distortion powers would be resisted, Klein didn't hesitate to pull out his right hand, a dark gold high-level charm clasped tightly in his palm. Ninth Law. He originally didn't plan on using the charm so quickly. It wasn't because he couldn't bear to use it, but he wished to engage in a longer battle to determine what Cynthia was good at after mutating into a monster. Only then could he target her weaknesses. After all, the Ninth Law was unable to make a general prohibition, and the clause had to be sufficiently specific. For example, it couldn't make beyonder powers ineffective in the area, but it could specify the nullification of a specific beyonder power. To use it to its fullest, he needed to observe carefully and make sound judgment. However, the present situation was forcing Klein to use his trump card. Otherwise, he suspected that he had no means of damaging this tree-like monster. If the ninth law charm isn't able to create an environment that allows me to kill the monster, I'll have to immediately escape from the villa with its help. I will lead Cynthia outside and find a chance to pray. I'll use the sea god scepter above the gray fog to bombard it with attacks. Just as the thought flashed in his mind, Klein, who had been constantly jumping amidst the attacking tree branches and flowers, solemnly chanted a word in ancient Hermes, law. As the activation incantation resounded, the dark gold charm in Klein's palm instantly turned ice cold. It was a coldness that seemed to make one lose any emotions. At that instant, Klein reached an extremely calm state. In the moment he threw out the ninth law charm, his thoughts rapidly surfaced as he considered what to prohibit. His first reaction was to prohibit the generation of any desire, but he knew that it was too general. Therefore, he thought of changing to the desire to procreate. After all, Cynthia's desire was to have a child with Admiral Emirius. The influence she had on her surroundings was a result of this. Just as the ninth law charm was flying in midair, turning into bits of dark gold beams of light that scattered into the surroundings, Klein suddenly thought of a problem. Cynthia was only an ordinary person prior to this. This is a certain fact. Over the past 3 nights, Klein had used spirit vision, divination, and other methods to repeatedly confirm that Cynthia wasn't a beyonder. Similarly, she would have long been discovered by Admiral Emirius, who could distinguish between ordinary people and beyonders. Therefore, her sudden transformation into a mutated monster was a problem he needed to pay close attention to. Could it be like Megos? She became a vessel of an evil god's descent through some form of ritual? No, if there's a ritual, it's impossible for me not to discover it. My spiritual intuition would have warned me not to activate my spirit vision and not look straight at Cynthia. It's some item or trait on her body that has an external force projected on her. Therefore, there weren't any problems the previous 2 nights until she suddenly mutated today. Regardless, the terror from her comes from somewhere else and not her body. Klein quickly made a judgment in 2 seconds. Without any hesitation, he seized the opportunity and said in a solemn tone, "This place is prohibited from having any interaction with the outside world." The ancient Hermes words, which were filled with mystery, instantly spread out as the dark golden light scattered everywhere and intertwined with the countless law-like symbols and magic labels before merging into the void. Hum! There was suddenly a light hum in Klein's ears, as he seemed to see the formless light, filled with desire, get expelled out of the room. Immediately following that, an illusory and resplendent starry sky appeared before his eyes. They were points of bright stars. Pa! Pa! Klein's eyes burst as fluid, a mixture of blood and plasma, gushed out horrendously. Although he had used the ninth law charm to isolate any external influence, the level of the power was extremely high. Just a normal level of recoil was enough to penetrate the natural protection of the high-level charm and burst his eyes. This damage came abruptly and without any warning signs. Klein didn't even have the chance to use paper figurine substitutes, just like Nimblewright Master Rosago from back then. If not for the ninth law charm, his eyes might not have been the only things that burst. He might have turned into a monster just like Cynthia. Meanwhile, the tree-like Cynthia came to a stop as her body began crumbling, turning into flesh and blood with brownish-green warts. The surrounding bodyguards and male attendants plopped to the ground unconscious. Cynthia's head was embedded in the blob of flesh as she muttered to herself, "Admiral, I want to have a child with you. Admiral, I want to have a child with you." She tried hard to extend the remaining tree branches on the ceiling and walls, binding Klein, who was still in a dazed state as a result of the recoil, and she pulled him towards herself. The moment Klein recovered a little, he immediately began struggling desperately. Despite his attempts to snap his fingers to light a fire or switch the powers of creeping hunger, he failed because his hands and arms were bound tightly. With the help of his clown powers, he saw the brownish-green warts approach. Stirred, Klein changed his appearance, turning his appearance from Admiral Emirius to Gehrman Sparrow. A Gehrman Sparrow with bleeding eyes. The binding tree branches paused as they mysteriously released their hold. They began flailing everywhere, as though in an attempt to grab at something. Cynthia's head was filled with disappointment and confusion as she muttered, "Admiral, where did you go? Admiral, where did you go?" Without the external force to continue the resistance, she finally only had the thoughts of having a child with Amirius thanks to the Baron of Corruption's distortion. This made her release Gehrman Sparrow. Klein flipped to his feet and covered his eyes with his right hand and pulled downwards abruptly, moving the horrendous wound towards his left shoulder. As his left shoulder became mangled, creeping hunger was tainted with a pure and resplendent glow. Klein looked at Cynthia's head and the pile of flesh and blood with pity as he spread out his arms. A holy flame which swirled around a pillar of pure light descended from the sky, enveloping the monster that had been reduced to flesh and blood. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.